To this first of this week's Exponential Race to Zero shows, brought to you by We Don't Have Time and the Exponential Roadmap Initiative, together with our partners UN Race to Zero and the We Mean Business Coalition. Today, we're going to look at green energy and how to get more of it right here, right now, because we need it. Before we power up this green energy session, let's welcome on stage the founder and CEO of We Don't Have Time, that's Ingmar Rentzhog, and the co-founder and CEO of the Exponential Roadmap Initiative, Johan Falk. Ingmar, hi, great to see you.
Thank you.
Yeah, you've got the floor.
Yes, and I'm going to do this quick. I'm actually going to start this segment by asking you, the audience, a very important question. And the question goes, how big do you think the chances are that we will ever meet the emission targets in the Paris Agreement on a scale between 0 to 100%? And we start here with the audience here on site, and those that think it's 0%, if you raise your hand, and we go to those that think it's 25%. Do we have any 25% in this room?
Huh?
It seems to be a very positive audience. 50%. We have some 50%. 75%. This was a very positive audience. And 100%. Not so positive. We have also asked this question to the viewers on Twitter. So far this morning we had over 1 million viewers that tune in to the broadcast. And if we bring up the answer here, we have a little bit more negative audience on Twitter. 63% thinks that it's between 0 to 25%. This question is something we have been asking a lot of impact investors and business leaders lately at We Don't Have Time. And many people are not as positive as you in the audience here today. Many people actually answer between 0 to 25%. I think that is very problematic, because if we're going to solve this, we need to think that we'll be able to do it. We need to have that vision. And personally, I don't just have the vision. I believe that we will do it. I'm 100% sure that we will meet the emission targets in the Paris Agreement. And I have some facts backing it up. One fact is, when we started with those broadcasts 5 years ago, we had 10,000 viewers. It was people tuning in, watching a show about climate solutions. When we did the broadcast last year, we had 5 million viewers. And when we did the broadcast on this year, Earth Day, just a couple of weeks ago, we had 13 million of viewers. So the number of people engaging in solution and wanting to drive change are increasing more than exponentially. And it's also businesses. The United Nations have an initiative called Race to Zero, where investors, businesses and cities can join. And in just 3 years, more than 50% of the total GDP belongs to a businesses or investor that have joined the Race to Zero. And that means that they have pledged to go net zero. They want to leave the fossil fuel-based economy behind. So this is going to happen. But there is just one thing that I'm not so sure about, and that is, are we going to do it on time? Because we really need to achieve this target before the climate crisis are getting out of control, so that we can't solve the climate crisis anymore. And that is what We Don't Have Time is all about. We Don't Have Time is a tool where everyone can use it. So just open your phone and download We Don't Have Time. And what you can do with the help of We Don't Have Time is that you can give climate love and reward all those that are working on solutions, so that we will see more solutions. And those that are lagging behind, you can give them climate warning, tell them to stop doing bad things and speed up. this is very important. The only thing we need to do is to speed up change in an exponential pace. And that's why we are very proud to have partnered up with Johan Falk and the Exponential Roadmap initiative.
Thank you, Ingmar. I'm totally with you. That's why we bring together leading transformers, disruptors, and innovators, which are all aligned with the 1.5 ambition. We have a common mission to halve emissions by 2030 towards net zero. And that is the carbon law. The carbon law was set in 2017, together with our chairman, Johan Rockström. It's then been implemented by the UN Race to Zero, the European, the US goals. So it also shows that it's possible to scale big ideas fast. But now it's about action. We are beyond pledges. And some of the examples of and initiatives that Exponential Roadmap is driving is the SME Climate Hub, the 1.5 Business Playbook, and the supply chain leaders, all driving exponential climate action. But today, it is about energy. And actually, renewables, renewable energy, is scaling exponentially. But we need to go even faster. And it's also about energy efficiency, which is just as important. It's the cleanest and cheapest way to actually cut emissions. We need a laser focus on energy efficiency as well. So we're very excited to bring together leading companies now focusing on how we can scale faster. Thank you, Nick.
Just whilst you're still with us, we're just waiting a little bit for Nigel to come in on the show. And so I've got you here, and it's a captive audience, so that's really fantastic. I mean, to what extent do you think this war in the Ukraine is focusing the attention of policymakers? Do you think it's going to lead to an acceleration of the increase in renewable energy faster than we've seen in the last few years? I mean, or do you think that people are going to panic and just build LPG terminals everywhere and start fracking as much as they can and digging everything up, all this old fossilized wood, which we call coal? I mean, what's your instincts? What's your sense? How do you feel positive or negative about this?
Ingmar.
War is never good. And if we're going to solve the climate crisis, we don't have time for war. But war in the past has really speed up development. And I think this war is also going to do that. We now seen that the European countries have stopped importing oil from Russia. For me, that is of course good, but it's kind of absurd. We can't just import oil from Russia. We also need to stop burning oil from wherever we dig it up. Yeah. That's the next step. But if you start with not importing, the price will go up. And when the price go up, the alternatives, the green solutions, will be the better alternative. And actually, what is making me sure that we're going to reach this 100% is our economy. Because last year, for the first time, renewables were cheaper compared to fossil fuel energy. So this will speed that up. And we have something we need to get rid of in order to really speed it up. And that is the fossil fuel subsidies.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think now when we have a war, I hope that our political leaders, we have a G20 meeting here in Sweden this week, actually. I hope that we realize that it's absurd to sponsor the oil countries. Yeah. Because that's really sponsoring blood money. Good. Thank you. Johan, you're going to be with us later. Nigel Topping is with us now, so let's make the introduction to him. Thanks very much indeed. I now have the pleasure of introducing Nigel Topping, who was appointed as the high-level climate action
championed by the United Kingdom for the UN climate conference COP26 in Glasgow last year. He's also a commissioner on the Energy Transitions Commission and one of the brains and many people behind such landmark initiatives as the Science Based Targets Initiative, the Business for Nature and the Global Commons Alliance. Nigel, it's great to see you again on our show, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Nick. It's great. It's great to be with you. This really historic week. As you say, I'm one of two high-level climate action champions. Worked very closely with Gonzalo Munoz, the Chilean champion. Now work with Mahmoud Mohidin, the Egyptian appointed champion. Really, just to drive those kind of collaborations you described, so that we generate the exponential pace that we all know we need. And before I did this, I was the CEO of We Mean Business. So it's great to see We Mean Business partnering along with Exponential Roadmap and Race to Zero, and we don't have time. So thanks to all the partners. And it's great to be with you today. So this 50 years, some of my first exposure to the kind of systems thinking that we need to drive this exponential change is through some of the limits to growth reports, which of course were also born out of this 1972 moment. And it's been particularly exciting to partner with the Exponential Roadmap as one of our key Race to Zero partners. You didn't mention the Race to Zero is the initiative that Gonzalo and I launched a couple of years ago, and that has now thousands of businesses, cities, investors, schools, universities, hospitals committing to the kind of exponential change that we're all working on. So I thought I'd just say a few things about COP26 and the momentum we have and about the way ahead. I think the first thing to say is, and Nick, this is someone who's been following the COPs for a long time. COP26 really was the first real economy COP where we really start to pivot to focusing on implementation. Of course, the Paris rulebook, this very complex body of negotiated items, was finalized, so we have that done now, and the countries really ratcheted up ambition so that they all agreed that we are focusing on 1.5, not well below 2 degrees. We are focusing on this decade and raising ambition every year, which we know we'll need to go from the trajectory we're on now to a net zero in the 2040s trajectory. And the COP, of course, was also contentious because it's big and it's messy and it never delivers everything that everybody wants. I think it was both a huge success and also highlights our collective failure. I think it's a huge success in the mobilization of momentum. That national momentum. We had huge mobilization of the business community, the finance community, cities, states and regions. We had over 1,000 cities in the Race to Zero, over thousands of companies, many of them through the Exponential Roadmap. We launched the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero last April with $13 trillion of assets. It was 130 trillion by the time we got to Glasgow. Some brilliant new financing mechanisms like the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet were launched. That's now targeting 26 emerging markets to use philanthropic money to crowd in public money, to crowd in more private money. The First Movers Coalition was launched to build on the success of things like RE100 and EV100 to send strong procurement signals to the market, to add that to steel and CCS and many other things. And I think really importantly, the breakthrough agenda based on exponential thinking, Johan, which we launched a year ago, a year before the COP, was embraced by countries. Over 40 countries embraced and supported the Glasgow breakthroughs, currently on 5 sectors. In fact, we're launching the agricultural breakthrough this week, but I think that'll be extended soon. And then the first report on that breakthrough progress by the IEA, IRENA, and the Champions team helping them will be reported this year. So lots of reasons for hope, because loads more ambition and momentum and real focus on implementation than ever before, much more state, non-state dynamic. But also, we have to be really honest, if you're a young person who's just learnt the climate science and looks at what the world has been doing the last 30 years, an abject failure. Emissions are still rising. We are not deploying nearly enough finance on solutions to drive those exponential curves faster than they're already going. As Johan said, even if we are going exponential in some areas, they need to go faster. And we know that even the most optimistic scenarios where every single pledge you can harvest from the mass in Glasgow. If they're all implemented, we only get to 1.8 degrees, but we're on much more like a 2.4 to 3.2 degree track. So three key things I wanted to say. The first is that we really see increasingly that we've got to focus more on resilience and start thinking exponentially about resilience solutions. We know that the world economy will be 10 to 20% bigger in 2050 if we adapt by implementing in resilient solutions and mitigate, but not just mitigate. And that will generate about $45 trillion of value, and it affects the lives and livelihoods of 4 billion people. So the first thing I want to say is it cannot be true. So please, every time you hear it, challenge it, that there's no business case for investing in adaptation. Those are huge numbers of people, of dollars, of economic potential. And whether that's extending insurance coverage, investing in mangrove restoration, investing in solar irrigation for smallholder farmers, clean cooking stoves, energy access, hurricane-proof housing. There's all sorts of very real solutions that are needed that are financeable, are investable. We may need more innovative business models, but we need to get those on an exponential curve as well. And in fact, we will launch the Resilience 2030 breakthroughs later this year. Second point I want to make is finance. None of this happens without deployment of trillions of dollars, both the mitigation and the resilience work. It's great that the finance community really has stepped up. I think they were the last. Cities really stepped up in Paris and said we've got to be net zero 2050. Businesses around about 2019, but the finance community really only stepped up en masse in 2021. But we need them, and they're there now. We have over 500 banks, insurers, investors, asset managers, and service providers in the Glasgow Finance Alliance for Net Zero, which I launched with Mark Carney just last April, so just over a year ago. Mike Bloomberg's now co-chairing. We have Mary Shapiro, the former SEC regulator, running the team there. So it's brutally focused on how do we turn that stock of 130 trillion into a flow to finance the transition to net zero. And you'll know some pretty big players like Aviva and Generation are already committed to net zero 2040 in there. And I think we'll see more and more people as that we intellectually really grasp the size of the economic risk and opportunity bringing their net zero dates forward. The GFANZ community are working on some of the technical issues about what are the pathways that need to be financed per sector, very much in line with our work in the Race to Zero and Exponential Roadmap. What are some of the finance mechanisms for accelerating the phase out of current fossil assets? So yes, we, as the earlier speaker said, we need to phase out fossil fuel subsidies, but we've also got a lot of fossil fuel assets that were built in the last 10 years that we need to shut early. So how does the finance of that work? And we need to really focus on mobilizing finance, private finance in emerging markets. Our estimates are that we need about $2 trillion a year by 2030 in emerging markets, excluding China. And that's about a 3x, and about 70 to 80% of that needs to come from the private sector. So we need to unlock that 70 to 80%. There's a lot of work going on now on these country platforms in countries like South Africa, Indonesia, Vietnam. And just last week, 2 weeks ago, I was in Kigali for the Sustainable Energy for All Forum. Bloomberg Philanthropies announcing an extra $242 million to accelerate the clean energy transition in 10 more countries. This Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, which I mentioned, is contributing $50 million to the SE for All's Universal Energy Facility. The IKEA Foundation put another 5.8 million into scale up of that facility. Innovate UK, the UK's Energy Catalyst, is putting another 40 million. So there's lots of really important catalytic money starting to flow in into mobilizing finance in emerging markets. One of my favorite examples I heard of was a company called Coco, who make clean cooking stoves using fuel, ethanol created from sugar cane residues in East Africa. The clean cooking stoves are made in a $100 million facility in India. The Coco just did a deal with the Rwandan government that they will invest 25 million in a nationwide sort of fuel ATM distribution scheme in exchange for the policy removing the import tariff on that technologies. That's a great example of innovative finance, right? Mobilizing real private finance with one smart policy move that's going to then provide the possibility of clean cooking for every Rwandan household, with all of the productivity benefits, health benefits, disproportionately for women as well. So just a good example of what can be unlocked. So what we need to do now, though, is really focus on making this all about the business opportunity to deliver the 2030 breakthroughs. Yes, there's a policy role, but one of the reasons I love the partnership with Exponential Roadmap, and I've probably used the word exponential more than almost any other, is that this is going to be an exponential transformation, and we're just beginning in many sectors. So I think getting companies to set their short-term targets in line with the science to show that exponential growth. We now have thousands of companies. I think we're about 8,000 companies now in the race to zero, and then focusing collectively on those very specific tipping points in 2030, whether it's green steel, green hydrogen, green shipping fuel, sustainable aviation fuel. And as I say, those Glasgow breakthroughs were launched and I see that extending and being adopted very much as part of both the COP process, but also as part of the broader clean energy ministerial process. Some of my favorite examples are the way that companies who commit it's starting to be a pattern within a few years, they bring their target forward. Maersk, I think it's 2018, they said net zero 2050, now net zero 2040. Mercedes said net zero 2039, now they're saying all electric by 2030. Just 2 weeks ago, Sony were 2050, now 2040. So this kind of Moore's law effect, that the more we all commit to exponential goals, actually the easier it gets to achieve them, is I think the most important message for every business. Join the race to zero, set your exponential goal, and we will see costs come down, deployment come up, and we will reach those breakthroughs. On the road to COP27, to close, a few pleas to those who are not yet join the race to zero, set your exponential goal, join this pre-competitive collaboration to figure out what we need to do, and then compete like hell to get there. Articulate the benefits of the moves you've already made on renewable energy, on electric vehicles, on your innovation journey. I heard Holcim last week say they launched their green cement, 30% less emissions. A couple of years ago, everyone said they won't sell any. They're already at 10% of market, a green product at a premium price. It's because cities and the whole value chain wants it. Above all, advocate for the policy change that's needed, and show to your staff, to your customers, and to the world that you're not just talking about it, you're not just setting long-term targets, but you're innovating today. The whole vibe that we want to create in Sharm el-Sheikh with Mahmoud is from pledges to actions, and create a real excitement about the innovative potential that's already being delivered by those who got out of the blocks early. So really looking forward to seeing many of you either virtually or in person in Sharm el-Sheikh in COP27 in November, to demonstrate that the exponential roadmap really is the pathway to the future that we're all trying to build. Thank you, Nick.
Great. Well, Nigel, thank you. That was so comprehensive. I think we just expected you to talk about renewable energy or green energy, but you covered the entire gambit, so we might as well stop broadcasting. Fantastic, Nigel. Great job. We're really pleased to have many of the Exponential Roadmap companies here. And yes, we use the We Don't Have Time stage very much as a place where these companies can actually talk about what they're doing and inspire others to go further and faster and join the UN Race to Zero. So super. Nigel, thanks. I'm going to leave it there. And now I'm going to introduce our next guest. That's Dr. Arunaba Ghosh. He's an international public policy expert, an author, a columnist, and an institution creator. He's the founder and CEO of the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, with experience in 45 countries. And he previously worked at Princeton, Oxford University, UNDP, our partner today, of course, or one of the partners, and the World Trade Organization. Dr. Ghosh, you have the floor, and you're with me there. That's fantastic.
Thank you, Nick.
Yeah.
Good day to everyone. I know some of you are here. It's a wet afternoon in Stockholm, but in some other parts of the world, it's pretty hot right now. And we're facing the most extreme heat that has been recorded in many parts, and it's going to keep getting worse. So I'm Arunaba Ghosh. I run the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. So what can I tell you about an exponential road to clean energy? The first question we have to ask ourselves is why? Why do we need to act? And of course, I can cite all sorts of statistics to you about the climate crisis being here, about the fact that there are millions of people still without access to clean energy. But for me, the why boils down to three things: energy access, energy efficiency, and energy security. The climate crisis is, of course, upon us. It's not something far out. And yet, the road we're on will still have about nearly 800 million people without access to electricity out in 2030, when we're supposed to have delivered energy access for all. So how do we make sure that those hundreds of millions of people get access to electricity, but it is also clean? At the same time, it's emerging markets, developing countries, where that demand, the next surge of demand for clean energy and electricity in general is going to come from. I come from India. And countries like India are going to post 88% of all the additional demand for electricity over the next 2 or 3 decades. So if we don't solve it for the emerging markets, if we don't solve it for the developing countries, then we don't solve it for anyone, certainly not for the planet. And at the same time, while we deliver access to electricity, while we make sure that it's efficient, we also have to make sure it is secure. I don't have to remind you that now energy security, climate action, geopolitics, and international cooperation all come together. And how do we build the resilient supply chains to ensure that the clean energy infrastructure that is needed in the countries where electricity is needed the most is secure, is affordable, is available for all? So if you accept the why, the question is what has been done already. In 2010, when I set up my organization, CEEW, India had less than 20 megawatts of solar. It was the same year when the National Solar Mission was announced. India now has more than 50,000 megawatts of solar, more than 105,000 megawatts of solar and wind and biomass, more than 155,000 megawatts of solar and wind and biomass and large hydro. And the target is 500,000 megawatts of non-fossil electricity capacity by 2030. This will be the first country that will build more renewables than its entire electricity system in a single decade. And India is not alone. It's going to happen in Vietnam, it's going to happen in South Africa, it's going to happen in Indonesia, it's going to happen in Philippines. Now, I say it's going to happen as if it's a certainty. No, it's not a certainty. Because a lot of other things have to go in. So if a lot has already happened, what else needs to happen? It is this exponential shift in the curve which is critical for what we need. India's targets, for instance, means that the 10 minutes I spend talking to you, we should build another about 2 megawatts, 1.5 to 2 megawatts of renewables every hour. Every hour, 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, 52 weeks a year, for the next 9 years, India has to deploy 10.5 megawatts of renewables. It's a breathless marathon. No country has done that kind of pace of installation before. And unless we put together all the bells and whistles, not just the policy targets, but the technology, the finance, the manufacturing, the supply chains, the skilled labor, the after-sale service, the end consumer finance, the reform distribution companies, the de-risk capital, unless all of that come together, we will not get down to this exponential change. And therefore, in the last segment of what I want to talk to you, I'm going to say, how do we get there? The first thing, of course, and I'm sure you heard it from Nigel as well before me, is finance. For that 10.5 megawatts of renewables getting deployed every hour, It translates to $150 million of investment every single day for the next 9 years in just India. So when we say there's trillions of dollars of capital sitting somewhere in the world, we have to ask ourselves, is capital flowing to where the sun shines the most? Is capital flowing where the wind blows the hardest? Is capital flowing within the tropics where you have those hundreds of millions of people without access to electricity, but where you will get that electricity demand, where the whole story will unfold? And that's why it's no longer sufficient just to make announcements. It's no longer sufficient just to go to a COP and say, here we are the capital investors, we have decided to invest. If you don't bridge the gaps between real and perceived risk. Sitting here in Stockholm, it's easy to dismiss an investment in Jakarta, an investment in Manila as risky. And therefore, we hold on to our capital and not deploy it where it's needed. We've got to figure out de-risking of capital at scale. Only then can we deploy electricity, clean electricity at scale. But there are a few other things that need to happen. And it has to happen with regards to empathy. Why do I say that? Because if we can't put yourselves in the shoes of the person who does not have electricity, you don't know what it is you're trying to solve for. If you can't put yourself in the shoes of this person who does not have access to clean transportation, you don't know what you're trying to solve for. If you can't put yourself in the shoes of the person who's running a small business, the hundreds of millions of small businesses that run on inefficient boilers across the world, you don't know what you're trying to solve for. And yet, if you look carefully, that's where the fortune lies. In India alone, there is a $50 billion opportunity to use clean, distributed renewables for livelihood activities in rural areas. Solar irrigation pumps, milk chillers, solar-based power looms, green fodder. In sub-Saharan Africa, that's a $12 billion opportunity. In Southeast Asia, equivalent numbers. And yet, these so-called small projects don't get the investment. And therefore, the last thing we need to do is empower these communities. The exponential change is not going to come from above, it is going to come from below. It is going to come from the landless laborer I met 10 years ago when India had barely any renewables, who took on a loan of $400 to install a solar panel on his thatched roof inside a forest. And I asked him why. And he said, well, you know, before solar, I was using kerosene for lighting. And my one white shirt would get dirty. And I was spending 50 rupees, at that time $1 a month, on detergent powder. After solar, I'm spending 20 rupees, 40 cents a month on detergent powder because my one white shirt remains clean. I've never yet met a banker on Wall Street, a banker in the City of London, who's figured out a financing solution for clean energy based on the savings of detergent powder costs. But that's what it means to put yourself in the shoes of the people who don't have the things we take for granted. There is big stuff happening. The 88% of electricity demand that's going to come from the emerging markets and developing countries. It's hundreds of billions of dollars of investment that will go in every year. But that exponential change will only come with two other E's: empathy and empowerment. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. Lots and lots of questions I'd love to ask you, but we're well out of time. We're keeping a tight ship, but that was very fascinating. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now I'd like to invite our Next keynote speaker, that's Andreas Regnell. He's Senior Vice President, Head of Strategic Development at Vattenfall. Thanks very much for being with us, a major electricity generation company in Europe. I just want to say, Andreas, I'm actually one of your customers in Germany.
Very good.
I have to confess, I was thinking about switching to a 100% green electricity producer, but your recent progress on decarbonising your business, halving emissions by 2030, towards net zero by 2040, I think I'm going to stick with you and go with this journey and see how it goes.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
And I think it's actually quite representative how many customers think today across Europe. And I will take a perspective as Vattenfall, as an investor in fossil-free power generation and fossil-free electricity systems, which is really quite, in many ways, different from what just heard the emerging markets perspective. I think was incredibly interesting and important to also bring with us. But I will take more the European perspective, and you mentioned some of the countries we're active in. We're big in, of course, Sweden, Germany, Netherlands, the UK, France, Finland, and Denmark. And first of all, the number one thing I would like to say, which is obvious to all of us here, is that electrification is the answer to many of our issues around climate change. Coming as an investor, we are quite involved in not only investing in renewable and fossil-free power, but also helping our customer to become fossil-free within one generation is our purpose. And in that process, we're essentially involving ourselves in what we often refer to as the hard-to-abate sectors. So steel, cement, chemicals, transport, etc. And it's very clear that if you want to transform a total value chain, in a hard-to-abate value chain, the way forward, as we have experienced, is to do it in partnerships along the full value chain. And of course, it's always beneficial to have partners, but why is it so particularly important when we get to the hard-to-abate sectors? And that because the risks are more significant, typically, because they call hard-to-abate because it's hard. It means that the risks are bigger, the investments are greater, and the leap of faith that you need to take to actually overcome the issues are bigger. And so there are many reasons then, if you can do the business case together, if you want, that you have the energy, you have the transport, you have the process, and you have the customer in one partnership, then you can actually reduce the risk. And we talked earlier about the risk sharing, because that will be one of the most important parts of accelerating this. And we talk a lot about exponential growth, and I think the distribution of risk to those parties that can take it and is actually a big part of the equation. But one of those things that we're involved in is hybrid, the fossil-free steel manufacturing, or fossil-free iron making that then will allow for fossil-free steel making. And that's one of those examples of where we originally were 3 companies, so mining, LKAB, energy, Vattenfall, and then the steel making, SSAB, and later on also Volvo, as one major customer of steel, have joined. And now they have the full value chain. And that's incredibly strong. And we're involved in a similar, or not similar, but another hard-to-abate is, of course, transport and air transport. And we're involved in another end-to-end partnership where energy, Vattenfall, the manufacturer of the electric fuel, Shell, and then the customer, the airline, SAS, in the end. And when we have the full value chain, it's essentially possible to take those steps that are otherwise so difficult to take. And one thing that I'd like to mention in this context is that and one of the reasons that we are so progressive, and one of the things that made us commit to the 1.5-degree trajectory and net zero by 2040, of course, we are world citizens, and we think that's kind of the way we all need to think as human beings. But maybe as kind of the leadership of Vattenfall, as important is that we think it's the only way to stay competitive as a utility or an energy company. Time will only allow for those players that are really progressive to stay competitive. So it's both something that we as individuals like, but it's a very, very commercial part of our strategy. Then we all ask ourselves, so what do we need to do now? And there, the answer is slightly different if you come from Sweden, Northern Europe, versus if you come from India. I realize that. But from our perspective, active in where we are, I think there is essentially a line of capital providers outside our doors and other doors of our type to provide capital. Capital is not the problem. I think there's a line of technologies, if you want, outside our door that we know how to do hydrogen storage. We know how to do batteries. We know, I mean, all those technologies that we need to make the new fossil-free energy system, it's essentially there. So we have the capital, we have the technology, and I also think we have a line of customers outside. And there I just want to take a bit of a detour. I think sometimes if you don't have the process, you don't have the product, you go out and you ask yourself, is someone willing to pay more for a fossil-free product version of the previous fossil version? And the people you go to is typically the procurement departments. And procurement departments are born and raised to say no. That's how they become good procurement departments. So they say, yes, we would prefer a fossil-free product version of the steel or the ammonia or the jet fuel, but we won't pay more. And that is actually something that I think have delayed some progress, because then the answer comes to the leadership of the companies that talk to the capital markets. And we previously heard of the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, which will put tremendous pressure on all CEOs if they want capital from the capital markets to move in line with a 1.5 degree trajectory. So they will say, unless we buy fossil-free product, we are not competitive. And that has, so the answer from the procurement layer is very different if you talk to the CEO. And I think now, the world is, at least the parts of the world that we are active, on the CEO answer. We need that fossil-free product now. So we have the technology, we have the capital, and we have the demand. And I think what actually stops us as Northern Europeans or Europeans right now from making as much progress as we need to do is that we actually forgot to tell the rest of our societies about the opportunity. It's still a relatively small part of society that sees this as clearly as an opportunity as we do and many of our customers. And to do this, to do this transition, we need a lot of electricity infrastructure, we need a lot of new factories, we need a lot of infrastructure in general that is taking space. And the people currently owning that space or seeing those windmills or are worried. And they don't have the same narrative, the same perspective on the opportunity as we have. So I think in our part of the world, it's actually not the capital, not the technology, not the demand. It's actually that we need to create this, the societal narrative to bring people with us. Because what we stumble on today are permits, and its supply chain to less extent, but still permits. So we need to bring society with us to enable it in this part of the world. Thank you.
Andreas, thank you very much indeed. That was really good. Thank you. Okay. So we go from green energy to energy efficiency. The green energy revolution is not just how we generate electricity, but how we save it and how we conserve it. I'd like to bring Johan Falk back on stage to give us a snapshot on the urgency of scaling this part of the energy jigsaw puzzle, energy efficiency. Come on down, Johan.
Thank you, Nick. So energy efficiency is really the first fuel. It is the cheapest way, it's the cleanest way to cut emissions. Can represent potentially up to 40% of the potential up to 2040. We have 10 million factories with tremendous waste, where there is an opportunity to cut energy waste. We have 30 million industrial motors with a tremendous opportunity to increase energy efficiency. And even more important, we are in an energy crisis, so this is absolutely the moment to get a laser focus on energy efficiency, just as renewable energy. So that's the reason why we bring 3 leaders in this particular space, Alfa Laval, ABB, and Microsoft, really to focus on how can we scale energy efficiency much faster. So that's what it's all about.
Okay.
Back to you, Nick.
Yeah, lovely.
Thanks.
Super. All right, so first on stage, I've got Julian, and we talked about his last name just a little minute ago. I'm going to say Jean-Etier, but he's going to tell me something else. And he is the president of the energy division and vice president of Alfa Laval, a global player in heat exchangers. Come on down. Julian, I want you to make your keynote. Come and stand by this nice table here. There's the camera. It's all yours. And correct your last name for me. I do apologize. I'm British. I mangle all French words.
It was perfect.
Okay,
it was perfect. Thanks a lot, Nick. Thanks a lot. Yes, thanks a lot for giving us the opportunity here to raise attention, to raise awareness about the topic of energy efficiency. My name is Julien Genetier, Nick, and I'm president for the business unit in charge of plate heat exchangers at Alfa Laval, and vice president of the energy division. Alfa Laval is a company headquartered in Sweden and is the global leading supplier of a highly efficient solution for heat transfer, separation, and flow. And we have made our own commitment to carbon neutrality by signing the 1.5-degree business playbook. And the announcement this morning of the partnership with SSAB in order to produce the first plate heat exchanger made of carbon-free steel is a major step on that journey. All of our equipment are predominantly made of steel, so this is a major step. But the journey ahead is still long, and there's many, many more steps to be made towards a full carbon neutrality by 2030. Similarly to us, many companies, many governments are making commitments towards carbon neutrality. But then comes the question, where to start? Is it about installing more windmills, installing more solar panels, finding new renewable source of fuels and chemicals? Is it about influencing the energy mix, addressing the hard-to-abate sector? Well, it's probably all of the above. But usually, we are forgetting about one essential solution, and it is energy efficiency. Energy efficiency, as Jonas says, is the cheapest and the most renewable source of energy. It's the energy that everyone possesses. Is there any more sustainable source of energy than the one we don't have to produce in the first place? And it will and needs to have a strong contribution in our race to net zero. As we can see here on the graph made by the IKEA in their scenario to reach net zero, the contribution of energy efficiency from the current trends all the way to 2040 needs to contribute with 40% reduction of this CO2. So this is a strong contributor, and what we cannot see on this graph is that by 2030, the contribution of energy efficiency will be up to 50% CO2 reduction. The other good thing about energy efficiency is that the solutions are already available. They just need to be implemented. Alfa Laval has, for example, some of those solutions. One of them, heat exchangers, is particularly important in this part of driving energy efficiency. You don't usually find heat exchangers, you don't really see them, but normally they are within, we tend to say, 1 mile or 1 kilometer around you, you might find heat exchangers. They are usually hidden in a building to help heat or cool a building. They are in a process to produce food, chemicals, and other fuels. And they do that when applying the right technology. They do that with a superior energy efficiency. I have the chance here to have on stage one of such plate heat exchangers, and we deliver many every year. And all of the heat exchangers we deliver in a year contributes to 50 gigawatt of energy saving every year. If you add the energy saving that is coming from the maintenance of the installed base of existing plate heat exchanger, you add another 50 gigawatt of energy saving. All in all, that's 100 gigawatt of energy savings that we deliver every year to the world. That corresponds almost to as much as the 90 gigawatt of new windmills that are being installed every year on the planet. For those who are used to these mass, and for those who are not used to these mass, 100 gigawatt correspond to 50 million tons of CO2. That's twice the size of the consumption or the production and emission of a city like Paris. At COP26, we have joined ABB in launching the energy efficiency movement, a movement aiming at raising the attention and awareness about energy efficiency as a key element of the race to net zero. And in our preparation to COP27, we are welcoming many other members coming from academia, government, institution, companies, competitors or not, to join the movement and increase the awareness and the attention on energy efficiency as a key enabler in our race to net zero, where solutions are already available, they just need to be scaled up.
Okay. Thank you, Julian. That was super. And I a little thing here right now. I've changed my mind. I'm going to do the panel afterwards on the cozy sofa. So if you'd like to take a seat over there,
certainly
I'll introduce our next guest. Okay, super. Yes. Our next guest now, and let me welcome on stage, is Åsa Granli. She is the head of Motion Sales Sweden at ABB and has more than 12 years' experience with ABB in various positions. Åsa, come on down. It's like a game show, this, isn't it? And give us your keynote. Lovely to see you.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here today. And so my name is Åsa Granli, and I'm head of sales in ABB Motion in Sweden. ABB is a global leading technology company. And for almost 140 years, we have been transforming industry and society and trying to achieve a more productive and, in the same time, more sustainable future. Today, sustainability is at the core of what we do. This is reflected in our 2030 sustainability strategy, where we have pledged to support our customer in reducing their CO2 emissions by at least 100 megatons. So we are doing this by pushing the boundaries of technology. And within our 4 business areas, we have process automation, electrification, robotics, and motion. And we are constantly increasing competitiveness as well as sustainability. So climate change, that is a fact. We also know that the global population are rising. And it is estimated that we will be 9.7 billion people on this planet by 2050. During the same period of time, the global economy is expected to double. And this, of course, is significantly increasing the energy demand. At the same time, we have an urgent need to reduce the CO2 emission to combat climate change. In this context, I mean, energy efficiency, that is not an if, it's a must. It is the simple and impactful solution to a very complex crisis we are in the middle of. It is the low-hanging fruit as a bridge to the path to the future where all energy is green energy. And I mean, it is as simple as that. As the previous speaker just said, the most sustainable energy is the energy we do not use. And this is really the essence of energy efficiency, to only use the energy that is needed. And the needed energy shall be used to maximum output. So we need to expand the political discussion to not only focus on energy transport, energy type or energy carriers, but also to include energy efficiency. Because here we have the solutions, we have the technology, we have the products already in place. We just need to take them into use. The biggest source of emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, as well as the largest consumer of natural resources, is the industry. So the industry is really a key player here to reach the target set in the Paris Agreement. And looking at, from a global perspective, 37% of all energy consumed is consumed by the industry, and 24% of all CO2 emissions comes from the industry. And a large portion of this is associated with electrical motors. So, of course, we need to take a look at all possible applications consuming energy. But let's start with the motors, because 70% of the electricity consumed in the industry is consumed by electrical motors. So if you look at an industrial motor, they are everywhere. And they have a lifespan of around 30 to 40, 50 years. This means we have a huge installed base of old motors, inefficient motors. And this is not only unreliable from a production perspective with old technology, it is also an energy leakage. It might seem like a small issue having this wrong motor in a wrong place, but from a global perspective, we have 300 million industrial motors installed. And if we could replace the non-efficient ones with high-efficient motors in optimized processes, we could reduce global electricity consumption with 10%. So the tricky thing here, that has been tricky at least, is that it's not always easy to know whether a motor is wrong, old, not optimized. But with a new digital solution we have in place, this assessment is very easy to do. You can do it on a whole site, on each individual motor. So the digital solutions coming now with the smart sensors, we can connect all the motors and to measure the performance, to collect data, to help us make the right decision. So digitalization is the enabler for energy efficiency decisions and actions, and in a very cost-efficient way. So change is needed, and I mean energy efficiency, that is just common sense. We have numerous examples of customers and partners joining us every day in streamlining their operations, and more join in every day. But this is still not enough. We need more. We need more stakeholders getting involved. We need everyone to really come together with their creativity and their determination, and to use the technology we already have. So to speed up this change that we all see is necessary, we have initiated the energy efficiency movement. Energy efficiency movement is a global movement where we invite everyone, investors, businesses, academia, individuals, non-governmental organizations, everyone, because we need everyone. We're in this together. We have the solutions in our hands together. So join the movement and do it today. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much, Åsa. And join us for the panel session. We're going to do it over here on the cozy bit of the stage. Super. Now we're going to go to our last guest for a keynote speech, and that's Nexi Detti, who's Senior Technology Strategist with Microsoft. And that was nice that Åsa gave us a link into digitalization. Nexi, you have the floor. Where are you? Yes, come on down. Yes. Take a nice spot here. There's a lovely camera there, and there's a big one floating around.
Thank you. I guess I don't need to do any introduction. Thank you, Nick, for that. Microsoft is a technology company. So we harness the power of technology to empower everyone to a more sustainable future. But we've done this for quite some time, this sustainability work, and we've been working with the first climate goal since 2009, where we set the first CO2 emissions reduction goal. That set so many things in motion. One of the things is when the introduction of the carbon tax in 2012. The carbon tax has been raised a couple of times throughout the years, and using that funding to actually start a program which is called AI for Earth. The program AI for Earth actually produced so many use cases in all the way from ocean cleanup to actually precision agriculture and many more use cases like that, where AI is an enabler. In 2016, we certified our campus to be zero waste campus, and that also inspired and set in motion a lot of things, all the way from setting the goals for the other campuses, but also setting the goals as a company to become a zero waste company. In 2020, we made the boldest commitment and laid out a plan to become carbon negative, water positive, zero waste, and protect more land than we use by 2030. These are all very ambitious goals, and they align very well with the thought leadership that we have even from the Exponential Roadmap Initiative. I'm going to go in and talk about some of the progress that we've made, because I think it's interesting to see how far we've come, right? When it comes to the carbon, we are investing in technology and innovation to remove carbon. We see that as a necessary to be able to meet the goals that we have. We are also investing and driving innovation in regards to renewable energy, signing power purchase agreements and long-term contracts for renewable energy. The other thing that is a lot of work that we have done that is also as part of the Exponential Roadmap Initiative is actually working with a supply chain. 87% of the supply chain now is reporting their emissions. We're working also with the supply chain to actually create an action plan so that we can continue to reduce these emissions to 2030. We have also introduced the Cloud for Sustainability as a platform to help organizations with their sustainability journey and their scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. When it comes to water, Microsoft does not use a lot of water, doesn't have a lot of footprint, but being a natural resource that has a planetary boundary, we see this as necessary to invest in replenishment projects. Through our work with water.org, we've made some great progress providing clean water and sanitation to more than 95,000 people globally. When it comes to zero waste, this is a huge focus, trying to move to a more circular economy, building our circular centers. We have 5 of them in development where, when they are fully implemented, we'll be able to have 90% reuse by 2025. We have 4 data centers that are zero waste certified, 11 campuses that have tailor-made roadmaps to become zero waste by 2030. And we have diverted more than 15,000 tons of solid waste from landfills or incinerators. When it comes to land use, when we establish our data centers, we use some land, and we have made a commitment to actually protect more land than we use. As of now, just last year, we have contracted to protect 17,000 acres of land. We have kick-started the Planetary Computer program, or the initiative, where we have more than 500 users interacting with the APIs, the data there, 24 petabytes of data available in an easy-to-use format from 30 different initiatives, environmental initiatives and observation initiatives throughout the world. And through the AI program, we have also given out 850 grants to be able to drive the necessary innovation to reach net zero. And lastly, I want to say that we are a big part of the Exponential we are a member of the Exponential Roadmap Initiative, and we try to play a matchmaking part together with our partners and customers, so that as stakeholders we can identify initiatives and drive them together. There is a lot that we can learn from the technology side of things when it comes to scaling, when it comes to exponential transformation, and we want to bring that to different industries using technology as an enabler, and using the Exponential initiative also as an enabler for facilitating collaboration. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much indeed, Nexi. Now come and join us with our other two friends from the other companies on the sofa. Well, two can go on the sofa, one can go on the chair there. Who wants to do the cozy bit over here on the sofa? It's like a daytime TV show, this, isn't it, really? Except it's this black sofa, which is very interesting. Okay, so we're here to talk about energy efficiency, and thank you very much for all your keynotes and covered many, many topics. But, okay, so was with the UN for 17 years at the UNEP, and also with the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. I was also a journalist on the Times newspaper in the 1990s, covering the environment and technology. And this thing about energy efficiency, even these points you're making, which is, you know, a kilowatt of energy saved is the best possible thing, you know, that you could possibly think of. They've been with us for years, right? Everyone's known intuitively and practically that this was absolutely a killer thing that we should do. We should deal with energy efficiency. And yet, and you had the numbers before, by the way, and there's some IRENA numbers that say by 2030, I think you have to, about 25% of the contribution will come from energy efficiency to halve emissions. Lots of numbers around on the benefit, but why is it never taken off? Why is it still the Cinderella, if I can call it that? You know Cinderella from the... Do you have any children?
Yeah.
Okay. Why is it still the Cinderella topic?
Yeah, maybe I can pick up on that. Okay. And I will come back a little bit to what I was talking about in my keynote speak. Yeah. We have known about it for a very long time, as you know, as you said. And from my perspective, from ABB's perspective, we have now, with all the new digital solutions, we have now the possibility to do these assessments and energy analysis from a holistic perspective in a very easy and cost-efficient way. And that's the new thing. Before you had to, you know, go out there in a complex industry environment, dangerous maybe, to assess motors or other equipment. Now it's possible to do it remotely. So that is kind of a new take on this one.
So that's the connection with digitalization as well, yeah.
Exactly.
And I would like to complement, because I think what gets measured gets done. And I think that's, if you look at transportation and buildings, there has been some progress there, and it was easier to measure, either to identify, you could have targeted incentive, targeted certification process. In the industry area, that's the measurement data and the data were the point missing. To have government, institutions, companies engaging on this roadmap. Digitalization will be a key enabler to drive energy efficiency, to support incentive, to support governmental programs and company-wide initiative to drive energy efficiency to a larger extent than it has been. And industry is roughly, or the energy efficiency gains in the industry is estimated to be half of the solution. Yeah. Buildings and transportation is partly already addressed. So we need solution from the digital world.
Absolutely, and I think part of the problem has been actually some data has been there, let's face it, to get that data to a place where you can analyze that and create insights, these kind of insights in regards to like where are the energy pain points, so to say. That was not as easy to do for many industries, and I think that has kind of evolved with the new digital technologies, even like, you know, retrofitting old systems to get that data, to even like the technology in regards to like ubiquitous computing at the factory, for instance, to get that type of a compute at the factory so that you can get those type of insights already inside a factory, let's say. So that has taken time to actually mature. That has taken time to actually open up, to say like, yeah, let's look at, there is some data, but some new data we need. We need some new IoT systems and so on. Digital twins are still, in my view, wishful thinking. We're still not there yet, and so on. So, but it's happening, and there is a tremendous gains to be gained, even from just facility optimization, 15 to 20%, for instance, energy efficiency. That is good enough to, for instance, to implement a solution like that, for instance.
So are there any other obstacles in this? I mean, I'm looking at the thing that looks like it's come from a Doctor Who. Sorry for all these British TV references. This Doctor Who thing over here from Alfa Laval, right? That apparently, there are all these sitting in hidden places, right? That nobody sees them, but they're doing all this work. Is part of the problem that it's not the technology or the digitalization, but these must be in cities all over the world, right? How do the cities get the finance? Is it the cities? Or is it the training of the experts? I mean, you think about Germany, where they've been trying to get heat pumps in, and they haven't got that many in because nobody knows how to install them, this kind of stuff. Is it a training thing? Is it a finance for city thing? Are there other blockages to the energy efficiency, massive step up, that's clearly possible and would be very gratefully received by, planet Earth and the atmosphere? Any other factors?
I think you touch upon the word innovation. The innovation is not so much in the technology, even though we all innovate on improving our product even further. But probably one of the key innovations should come from business model, innovative into business model, because you talk about cities and what a city would do. But a city would possibly reuse the heat or the excess heat that is generated by an industry or a data center, which require then a sector coupling between a private and a public sector. And this type of business model innovation is key and needs to be encouraged in order to stimulate, for example, the reuse of waste heat from an industry into a district heating or district cooling network. Education is also a key element and a key enabler. If we consider that energy efficiency is a good way to decouple social and economic growth, and at least don't sacrifice social and economic growth while we don't emit more, then education and training around the importance of energy efficiency is going to be key in our countries, in developing countries even more, as they get the opportunity to get their industrial network right in the first place.
I was going to come to that because I think in the past, the debate on energy efficiency was always like it's a developed country thing because they have all the emissions, so if we can make those more efficient. But for the poorer countries, it's not important, right? Because they don't have the emissions, right, to be efficient about. But that's kind of changing, isn't it? Because we have our Chinas and our Indias, we have our Brazils and our Mexicos, and, indeed, we have our least developed countries. That's maybe a different thing altogether, right? But can we take what we're developing here in wonderful Sweden, Northern Europe, blah, 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 and export these to countries in ways that would help them? And again, where does the finance come? That's the other big question, right?
I mean, the short answer to that question is yes, of course. Let's take this technology. It's not a rocket science kind of thing. So all the developing countries have the possibility to do right from the beginning, as you just said. And I would also like to touch upon the business model thing, because the financial part of it might potentially be an issue. So there, I think also from the industry, we need to look into different kind of business models to really allowing all countries to join in on this. It could be, for example, leasing agreements or other type of business models that we are not using to that biggest extent today.
I think there's two things that the first one, from a business perspective, I think one thing that is really important is the culture in regards to how, within the industry and the company, in regards to how we talk on energy efficiency. Understanding that is actually where we can take action right now And that's what we actually need. We need action, and that is the easy or the low-hanging fruit. The other part, if we compare countries, I used to work at ABB as well back in the day.
It's so cozy here in Sweden. Yeah. I bet you probably worked at ABB as well, didn't you? She probably worked at Alfa Laval. But don't say Volvo cars as well, because
it's all okay. But one point there, like we used to get these like requirements on how to build these huge power HVDC transformers, and whenever they came from developing countries, undeveloped countries, the losses that they tolerated were a lot higher than they were, for instance, if that specification came from Germany. So there is that part of raising that awareness, that education, and saying that if you, even in the power transmission, we could save a lot by actually just changing the specification and asking for a better designed product.
Yeah, sorry.
I could
Julian.
add one more thing. I've said in my keynote that energy efficiency is the energy source that every country or everyone possesses. And there was a statistic in the made by the IKEA that €1 million invested in energy efficiency is creating up to 6 to 15 full-time jobs in the country where you make this investment. So it's a very local business as well. So it's a fantastic opportunity for governments of developed and in countries in development to foster energy efficiency measures.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned jobs, because it hasn't really come up in any of the shows so far, and I hope it will come up later in the day, because we need to connect these kinds of innovations and kind of changes with what does it mean for people's jobs on the ground, because obviously, you know, we want the world to get off fossil fuels, for example, and there's obviously some concern in some countries. South Africa, for example, at the climate COP in Glasgow, needed some reassurances from the so-called donor countries that there would be some just transition within this getting out of coal, for example. So I'm glad you mentioned jobs. But I wanted to come back a little bit on the issue of the developing countries, because it strikes me that in Europe and North America and other places, we're innovating these things, and our governments are, you know, pleased we're innovating them, I think, to a large extent, and we're contributing to emission reductions in our northern countries. But the big prize is in the developing countries, right? Because that's where the emissions are going to surge off the Richter scale unless we help. So do you think institutions like Business Sweden and export credits and all these other things come into play in this very important area that we need political cooperation between nations, which sorely sometimes is a bit of a headache? And because we're talking about the 1972 conference, which was trying to get international environmental policy moving for the first time ever. Do you think that there is an opportunity for the governments of, say, the Nordic regions to make it more favorable to bring these developments to the developing countries, to work on those?
I certainly think so. And as you were implying, with new business model should come also a new financing model. And there's an opportunity to foster and develop more programs. Business Sweden can be one vector of that, and other export credit agency can be a vector for that, in order to secure the implementation of energy efficiency first principle in developing countries as they are developing their industrial network, their cities, their transportation network. So certainly so.
Yeah. I agree as well. I think this is not a one-man show, or not the industry's own show, so to say. We need to really, truly collaborate. I mean, Business Sweden for sure, and other organizations. And I think it's a great opportunity for us in the northern part of Europe to really help and support, but also, as you were mentioning, local trainings, so to say, to write the right specifications from the beginning, to make the necessary high demands locally in the countries.
Well, you mentioned buildings before, because I always find that a fascinating area, because there is something that was born in Paris in 2015 at the Paris Climate Conference, which was actually UNEP, the UN Environment Programme, the Secretariat, which is the Alliance for Buildings and Construction. And whenever they bring their assessments out, it's always stubbornly that buildings are about 38% of global CO2 emissions. And you see, you know, lighting coming in, LEDs and all that, you see all this coming in. But stubbornly, it remains like 38%. this efficiency area has got to be a big gain there, but I think it gets back to this other question, which is who makes the decision in these buildings to have these kinds of better heat exchangers, digitalization, you know, when it comes to motors. Who makes that choice? Is it the government, the city, the landlord, whoever owns the building, the homeowner? Are there incentives for it? And if it's a big building, you know, who's deciding on that? Because there are people that own whole estates of buildings, don't they? Shopping malls and things like that. This is a complex structure. Maybe it's not what you're specifically working on, but I think it's important to reflect that
I can comment on that.
It's a complex world out there to get these things out.
I can comment on that a little bit. I think most of that comes actually from the way we utilize the buildings. Like, so the utilization is very, very low. And if you look at, I've worked with smart buildings for like seven years ago, and everybody was talking about how you could save up to 40%, but that didn't really happen. I think what happened during COVID, there is now also something, there is a movement that is happening in regards to how we utilize, for instance, our offices. All of a sudden, these new business models where you actually can be at a hotel office near the neighborhood, so you don't even have to travel. So there is things like that is going to change that game a little bit. But then there is a lot of commercial buildings that are unutilized or utilized very, very low. So that's a big issue.
I could bring two reflections. I'm not an expert on it, but if I take this building here in Stockholm, probably the heat exchanger that has been designed to cool and heat this building has been designed for extreme condition when it's 45 degrees C in Stockholm, which is not every day, or when it's minus 25. But very seldom it actually operates at the optimum conditions. And here digitalization and smart conduction of a heat exchanger, for example, of any other products, is going to be key. We consider that half of our heat exchangers are not operating anywhere close to their maximum and ideal conditions. And that represents in total for all heat exchangers up to 1 gigaton of CO2 that is consumed or emitted because of poorly performing heat exchangers. So there is a huge opportunity to optimize the way we run and utilize existing building. Then if you move in the developing world, one of the previous speakers on stage was talking about what happens between the two in the tropical areas where most of the population is located. And the need for cooling here will be really critical in buildings. And there was an assessment that if every single people that is living in this area will put a small AC, it will require the electricity production of Europe, Japan, and US alone to be added. There are smarter solutions to do that using district cooling network, reusing cold water from the river that we do implement in some part of the world and that we have to get right as we plan and develop new cities in this part of the world as well. So I would imagine that this is probably the developing part, and the poor utilization is probably tainted all the other efforts that are made in order to improve that. So we are stuck on that 38% that you mentioned, Nick.
You're absolutely right on the air conditioning. It is a potential disaster in the making if they don't get it right, and also don't use the right chemicals in the air conditioners, not the old ones, which, you know, I mean, HFCs have gone, but there's other nasty ones knocking around the system these days. Let me ask you one other thing. I mean, we've got Egypt coming in November for this climate COP27. You mentioned some new alliance that... Who's in this alliance? Who are they? And have you got any targets on Egypt?
I guess you're referring to the energy efficiency movement that I was talking about. Alfa Laval is one partner in this, and we have many more.
Is Microsoft not a partner?
Not yet, but maybe soon.
Oh, that's so sad, isn't it? Why don't you join them? I mean, you'll be very welcome.
Right here, yes.
We don't want you left out.
And we're many more. But, I mean, to really change, so to say, the political atmosphere in a meeting like that, a forum like that, we need to be many more in a movement like this. We need to, you know, as I said before, expand the political focus to also include the energy efficiency topic, because it is, you know, progressing on the agenda, but it's not, as far as I think at least, as high as it needs to be. So there I think, you know, raising awareness, talking about this, be here talking about it with all stakeholders. This is the way we are going to change it. We need to raise our common awareness about this.
Well, I think one of your challenges is that when you come to a UN climate conference, it's always different groups of nations who are like, what's in it for us, right? Yeah. And obviously the rich countries can see it quite clearly, but I think some developing countries still see it as you're just trying to make, say, fossil fuels more efficient. But as the renewable energy sector grows, you've got to make the renewable energy sector more efficient as well, haven't you? Yes. Because we don't want to waste all that wind power and solar power, right? So it doesn't go away. It's not like it's about reducing fossil fuel emissions. Yes, it is. But it's also about reducing the losses that you might get from inefficiencies in the renewable energy sector too. So it's actually two areas.
No, but it's for me, true success at COP27 will be that all countries will adopt an energy efficiency first principle. Yeah. Yet we should not oppose the renewable electricity and renewable chemicals and fuels that are needed, because in order to reach net zero, we will need that. Yeah. It needs to be a balanced view on the two set of solutions, energy efficiency and renewable source of energy have to be co-developed at the same time. Yeah. The timeline might be different. One is ready for scale-up, one needs to be developed and mature in terms of technology. But both will require investment, capital allocation in order to succeed in both and reach a target of net zero by 2050.
Okay. I can take half a second, because there's a little clock there telling me to shut up. So
I'll use half a second and say that one important thing, I guess, is to use this narrative that has existed in the ICT community on how you scale things and which kind of partners you work to create these new business models. A lot of times is actually, even for underdeveloped countries, is what kind of value do you deliver with a solution? So if you can add added value by adding, you know, digitalization as part of the solution, I think it will scale in those countries as well.
Yeah. Good, everybody. I think we're going to have to close it there. Thank you very much indeed. I love energy efficiency. I think it's a really fascinating topic. The only reason I was being a bit hard about it was it's been such a strong topic for so many years, and I really hope it can take off much more, especially with this new alliance initiative or whatever you want to call it.
Energy efficiency movement.
Energy efficiency movement. Let's remember that one. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye. Bye. Come round this way. We've got more guests coming on the show. Jolly good. Where's that little camera gone to? Come this way. Come on down, camera. We're now going to focus on electricity revolution. And let me welcome back Johan Falk of the Exponential Roadmap Initiative. And Johan, can you frame this section for us, please? Thank you.
Yes, now we talked about energy efficiency. It's incredibly important, but the other big solution is around the green energy system, right? And we need to do both. We need to accelerate both and go much faster. As we said, sun and wind is on an exponential pathway. But that's not sufficient. We have to go even faster. We need to ensure that we don't block this exponential development. But also, the green energy system is much more than sun and wind. We also need to be able to store energy and use it for fuels. So it's also about hydrogen, it's about storage, it's about e-fuels, which can also take us to zero aviations and shipping over time. So that needs to go hand in hand, and these are not future technologies, but we need to pull them in further. So we have a very exciting group of companies here, which are all aligned with the 1.5 ambition.
Absolutely.
Exactly. So it's Orsted who's gone through incredible transformation, now focusing on renewable energy. You have D-Light, particularly working on removing energy poverty. You have liquid wind, accelerating e-fuels, and finally IKEA, who's driving renewable energy. They'll focus on how we can scale the green energy system further.
Okay, and they're all members of the Exponential Roadmap Initiative?
I think they will or become members, but this we have discussion.
Okay, super. All right.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Nick.
Johan. Very much indeed.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to get a keynote here from Emil Damgaard-Gran, who is with Orsted. He's head of policy engagement at Orsted. And Emil, if you're with us on the magic of Zoom, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I believe I am with you through the magic of Zoom, and I've promised to spend a few minutes on telling about Orsted, our transformation, and how we view the energy transition landscape. Because indeed, as Johan was just saying, it involves a multitude of technologies and solutions that all need to be integrated. And first of all, thanks a lot for having us. We just talked about the Exponential Roadmap Initiative, and we in Orsted are very happy to now be joining the Exponential Roadmap Initiative to share our experiences from our transformation and to get inspiration from others of our peers and from NGOs and from people across and companies across the value chain on how to go the last mile on decarbonization. But just quickly for the ones of you who might not be aware of what Orsted, what kind of company that is. Orsted is the largest global developer of offshore wind power. We used to be one of the most fossil fuel intensive companies in Europe, but we transformed. We dismantled our legacy oil and gas and coal business, and we've converted our coal-fired power plants to sustainable biomass and certified biomass, or will be closing them down, the last as per next year. And in general, we have been rated as the most sustainable energy company in the world by Corporate Knights. So enough of bragging for now. I haven't been main responsible for it, so I don't think it's too much to do a bit of bragging there. But what we are trying all the time is to advance our goals and our targets even more. That means we are the very first energy company with an approved and aligned both on short and long-term science-based target. That means that, of course, we have a supply chain decarbonization program in place where we also engage with our suppliers on how do we decarbonize steel production, for instance. I just came from an event we actually hosted here in Gentofte in Copenhagen today, and Steel Zero, another very laudable initiative on what are the policy levers that need to be pulled in order to speed up the decarbonization of steel production, for instance. So we try to our best possible, in the best possible way, to see how can we decarbonize not only our own operations, but also how can we help our suppliers and make sure that we will become fully decarbonized or fully net zero across all scopes by 2040, the latest. I quickly want to, with my last minute or two, point to some of the some of the challenges we see in the energy landscape. Because, of course, when we talk about renewable energy deployment, yes, it's not only solar and wind power. The good news is that they are, I think, most people in this virtual room might be aware that it's cheaper to deploy than fossil fuels right now, but that's not just enough, of course. We also need, for instance, renewable hydrogen. And that's why we're also proud to partner with the liquid wind potentially on the flagship RUN project, which could be one of the largest e-methanol projects, which will take place in northern Sweden. But there are some challenges for speeding up the deployment, both of solar and wind power and of renewable hydrogen. And on solar and wind power, as we see it as a developer, it's very much a question of finding the space. It doesn't cost government anything to make available more seabeds or more sites for solar and wind deployment. Of course, it has to go hand in hand with nature and biodiversity concerns, but it is something that just needs to go faster if we want to move exponentially with the deployment of renewable energy. there are some challenges for renewable hydrogen and e-fuels as well. We can do a lot from an industry side, but we also need to make sure that the public sector facilitate a demand push. So that is, for instance, agreeing on which standards that constitute sustainable e-fuels or renewable hydrogen. That is on supporting some of the early stage projects that we need in order to mature the technologies. And that is in general to see if we can create a level playing field so we don't subsidize fossil fuels. My last remarks here will be that I look forward to taking part in the panel discussion after that, and also to diving a bit deeper into what is needed to make sure that this exponential change towards a 100%, a world that runs 100% on renewables, that will happen even faster. Thank you for now.
Super. Well, thank you very much. And yeah, please do stay on because we do have a panel coming up after this. That was really good. I'm going to now invite Carol Gobzinski, who is the head of climate and energy at Inga Group. This is the largest franchisee of the world-famous IKEA brand and accountable for establishing and implementing the overall climate and energy agenda throughout its business. That's your role. If you'd like to join the stage, this would be absolutely fantastic. You have our full attention. The cameras are here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yep, great.
Hello, everyone. My name is Karol, and I'm leading the climate and energy within the Inca Group. And within IKEA, we have a beautiful vision to create a better everyday life for the many people. And as we all know, the better everyday life on this planet depends on the stable climate conditions. And this is why it's not a question why we are taking the climate action and why we are committed to follow the science and why we are committed to contribute to 1.5 ambition, why we are working with Exponential Roadmap initiative, as well as contributing to development of the pathways under the UN Race to Zero. And by working, we are working towards achieving halving the emissions across the value chain by 2030, as well as reaching the net zero latest 2050. Beyond that, we would like to accelerate the renewable energy transition beyond our value chain, and that's what we are working towards. During the last couple of years, we reduced emissions across the value chain, so including scope 1, 2, and 3 in absolute terms, and we are working towards keeping that trend going forwards. And how we achieve this reduction, I think we heard a lot about energy efficiency, which is such an important factor, and it should definitely come first. And we spoke a lot about offering for many years already as IKEA only LED lighting. But since we set science-based targets as well, we improved the energy efficiency of LED lighting range by almost half, what is enabling to reduce the emissions of the value chain, as well as is enabling people to cut their energy bills. It is about increasing the renewable energy share through the last years, and third part is about offering more plant-based options, because we know that plant-based diet has much lower climate footprint. Going forward, we have three main movements that we are working towards. One is about transforming to become much more circular business model, with having all the products designed with circular principles, designing the services which are enabling the circular flows within the society, and using only renewable and recycled materials. Second, it's that I will focus most on today. It's about renewable energy. And when we talk about renewable energy, first of all, it's about the improving energy efficiency, so the cleanest and cheapest energy source for companies, individuals, and the whole society. It is about electrification. We love heat pumps, and we've been a fan of heat pumps for many years. That's why already many of our stores are using this technology, which is super energy efficient and is not creating any air pollution locally. The third one is about renewable energy, and I will come back to this one later on. And the third movement is connected to using materials and food ingredients with much lower climate footprint. As Inca Group, the largest IKEA retailer operating across 32 markets, we committed to support the transition towards renewable energy across the value chain by investing 6.5 billion euro by 2030 primarily in wind and solar, but as well in other technologies, to enable reduction of the value chain footprint, but as well going beyond. Until today, we invested more than 2.5 billion euro in on-site and off-site investments across many of the markets where we operate. And lately, we just announced new projects, 9 projects, which will be located in Germany and Spain. Going further, we know that investments are very important, but this is not the only factor or important area of action to meet our reduction within the value chain. It's about as well collaboration. That's why we are sharing the solutions, but as well finding the partners who are supporting us to develop the renewable energy projects, to develop EV charging infrastructure, as lately within Sweden, we're installing 700 EV chargers on our premises. And then it is about going further. It's about securing that you have the right measurements across the business. We want to empower all the co-workers to take climate action as a part of everyday job. And this is why it's so important that greenhouse gas emissions data, it's not only reported data, but actually the performance driven on daily basis by the many co-workers. And thank you very much, and looking forward to the discussion.
Carol, thank you very much indeed. I'm sorry we haven't more time for a good chat, but thank you very much indeed. It's absolutely brilliant. Do you want to stay on this panel, or?
Pleasure.
Yeah, why not? Why not just join us as well, Carol? Sit in. Right, let me now invite some other guests onto this section. We've got Katie Plitcher from D-Light. She's Director of Climate Finance and Strategy. You're coming in by the magic of Zoom, I think? You're not Katie, are you? Yes, she's here. Fantastic. Okay.
Hello.
Good. We've got Emil, of course, from Orsted, who is actually standing in for Philip, who was, I think, unwell, and I hope he's better. But thanks for being available. We've also got Caroline Barth. I probably mispronounced that because you've got an umlaut, haven't you, on the A? Okay, but you're public policy with Liquid Wind, and you're responsible for public policy and international expansion. And Caroline engages with politicians and industry bodies to gain supportive legislation for e-fuels like methanol.
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to have a little panel here. I hope you can see me, or at least hear me, on the Zoom call there. And Katie, just to say that you manage the climate finance program, is that right? And the strategic projects for D-Light.
Yes, that's right.
Great.
I'm part of a global partnerships team.
Okay, fine, super. All right, before I go to questions, Katie, can you maybe give me like a short pitch about what D-Light does?
Sure thing, yeah. So D-Light specializes in providing pay-as-you-go solar home systems and other transformational products, mainly in sub-Saharan Africa. So along with others in our industry, we work to replace kerosene lanterns with sustainable solar home systems and lanterns. So the key to this is reducing the upfront cost, as a lot of the households that we're working with can't afford, a high upfront cost, even if it's fairly, low budget typically. So we've specially designed a technology platform that enables us to let customers make pay-go payments, which are, pay-as-you-go, made on a daily or weekly basis via mobile money. And then this makes the system cost overall less expensive on a daily basis than kerosene. So then customers will experience health and livelihood benefits as a result. So to date, we've reached over 125 million people with our products, and our aim is to transform 1 billion lives by 2030. And at the same time, we've avoided 25 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions, and we aim to scale this in increasingly verified and measurable ways.
Okay, cool. So now I'm going to ask Caroline, tell us what Liquid Wind is, because those that we don't know your company, we're speculating merrily. What is Liquid Wind, right? It has all sorts of connotations in the English language, but yeah. Tell us about Liquid Wind, its ambitions, and your plans to scale e-fuels. There's a more formal question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So our mission is to scale e-fuels, just as you mentioned, but also to do it in a sustainable way. Mm-hmm. And more concrete, what we do is we take renewable electricity, which we get from wind, and we convert it into a liquid fuel. And with this liquid fuel, which then is easy to store and to transport, we can enable a green transition for hard-to-abate sectors, such as aviation and shipping.
Okay.
Our focus market is the shipping industry, where nearly 100% of the fuel used is based on fossil sources today. That's nearly 100%. And we use an enormous amount of fuel. So if we want to make this transition from fossil to green, we need a scalable solution. We have the scalable solution, and we work with big industrial players to make this happen. For example, Orsted, Alfa Laval, which we saw earlier today, and Siemens Energy.
Okay.
And I want to add one thing more.
Yeah, please.
So we have the technology to produce the fuel. We have the technology to use the fuel. This is something can be used in the maritime sector already today. And we are ready to scale.
And is anybody using it?
Yes.
Hooray.
Not the renewable version of methanol, but fossil methanol.
Okay.
But it's chemically the same.
Okay, okay. Good, yeah, because, I mean, we could talk all day about how dirty shipping bunker fuel is. I mean, it's the dirtiest stuff, and it's the stuff that's left over from the petroleum industry after all that refraction or whatever they call it, and it's the dirty stuff at the end, and they still managed to sell it on. I mean, if it was actually on land, it'd be like toxic waste. You wouldn't be like, you wouldn't be able to touch it or even look at it, right? But it gets into ships and it can go around the world. It's absolutely amazing. Okay, great, everyone. Let's take a deep dive into how we actually can accelerate the scaling of green energy solutions. So what do you see as the major obstacles, and how do governments and cities need to respond? Emil, what's blocking your major expansion, and what do governments and cities need to do? Maybe you can start, and then I'll go to Caroline.
I'm very happy to begin out here. First of all, I mean, we can expand fairly fast. And second of all, apologies for my extremely boring background here. I realize that compared to the scenery
we have to admit that. It is probably the most boring background we ever had. There's no sign of even a wind turbine anywhere.
No, I think my best excuse is, yes, I came on as a late substitute for my good colleague, so you'll have to stick with that background and for now.
Congratulations,
but the next time,
thank you.
I'll give you fireworks and wind turbines and everything. But of course, we can expand fairly fast, and we are growing our business within offshore wind power, renewable hydrogen, e-fuels, onshore wind, solar power, battery storage. So that's all fine, but as we know, and the reason why we are gathered here virtually or physically, is that it's not happening fast enough. And one of the biggest levers that governments again can pull is to set aside more space, and especially when we talk about offshore wind, there was just a big declaration made in the Danish city of Esbjerg with Ursula von der Leyen and 4 heads of government. I think it was last week or the week before that, on a target of 150 gigawatts of offshore wind power. That is something, and that is what is needed. That is setting aside the sufficient amount of space, because we need a lot of renewable electricity in order to drive the decarbonization of transportation, of industry, of heating, and also just to power our homes. The other thing is the speed. It's fine that we have all these fancy targets and we set aside the space, but permitting, for instance, it can take up to 8 years to have approval for an offshore wind farm. Some places in the US, historically, there have been, it has been quite challenging because you have had to get approval from around 30 different institutions, organizations, in order to build an offshore wind farm. And that is not efficient enough. If we want to stay within 1.5 degrees, then we don't have that time. So space and speed in terms of approval, those are 2 of the biggest and most important levers that can be pulled.
Carol, I'm going to come to you in 1 second, but I just need to ask our friend again, Emil, this question. The permit question is going to come up later in this show as a major obstacle by another speaker after you guys have gone. And I keep understanding that in countries like Sweden and Denmark and things like that, it's not just it takes a long time to get the permits, sometimes they don't even get approved, right? Once they're just thrown out, right? Or they're rotting on some shelf somewhere in some official's office, right? Because nobody wants them on land, and maybe some people don't want them offshore. I mean, I sympathize with communities that have some concern about wind turbines, but there's got to be ways to get through this, right? Because otherwise the downside is rip-roaring climate change for everybody for the next, million years. So how do you get around the permit thing? What do they need to do?
You're right. And of course, no country or market is the same in terms of regulatory framework. So it is tricky. There's no fancy one size fits all. But I think that the acknowledgement of that there are pros and cons with all energy technologies. If we choose to block all new solar farms or wind farms, then we'll have to go with the old ones that are polluting, and the old coal-fired power plants, gas turbines. More oil in our transportation. That won't go. So we have to acknowledge that there are pros and cons. Of course, there are great concerns. We also have that in terms of biodiversity, for instance. And that's something that every company should take seriously. And I think that some companies could definitely do even more. We've set the target to say that all offshore wind farms that we commissioned by 2030, the latest, they will be so-called net nature positive. Yeah. So that means that we will, if there are any implications for the places where we build the offshore wind farms, we will offset that, or we will make similar projects other places.
Okay, Emil.
That's on biodiversity.
That's good. Yeah. That's good. All right. So let's just hear Caroline. What's blocking you? What do you want to? What can governments and cities do in, say, sub-Saharan Africa to speed up the penetration of what you're doing, Caroline?
Sorry, Katie.
Katie. Well, then I've got the wrong person. I'm a complete disaster here. It's you I'm supposed to be asking, isn't it?
Yes, but please
don't. Oh, God, I said Caroline. Katie, I'm going to come to you in a second.
Please.
It doesn't matter. I'm going to ask Caroline the same question. What's blocking your development of all these wonderful e-fuels that are made from renewables?
So, firstly, I definitely agree with Orsted, of course. Okay. But we see a demand to make this transition in the industry. But if we want it to happen today, which we, of course, need it to happen today, we need to create further incentives for the industry. So we need regulations, making sure that the polluters pay for their emissions, and making it more beneficial for the industry that choose to use the green alternatives. And this can be done through economic instruments, for example.
Yeah. Katie, I need to ask you that same question, because actually, it's not here actually in the questions I'm supposed to ask, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because you're in sub-Saharan Africa. I lived in sub-Saharan Africa for 13 years when I was working for the UN Environment Programme. There are different kinds of problems there, aren't there, for getting things out into the communities and the countries. What slows you down in Africa a bit?
Yeah, so certainly the policy element is there. There are some countries that have a much easier commercial environment to work in. One of the biggest elements we face is value-added taxes as the goods and import taxes as goods come into the country. Oftentimes they are imported, and oftentimes the taxes can be, 50% of the cost of the goods. In other countries, they have exemptions, which really, really help increase affordability. The other is just logistics. We're dealing with very last-mile communities, and so a key there is having a robust network of sales agents and distribution outlets, and it just requires a lot of training and maintenance, good incentives, and so we are creating livelihoods as we're building out this network, but it is one that is a challenge to maintain. And so I think the more we can leverage the existing networks that are there amongst different communities, and then also work with governments and funders to run large-scale programs that will help subsidize and make this possible in even more remote areas than we can reach currently. That will help a great deal.
Is corruption a problem?
It certainly is in areas. A lot of U.S. companies and European companies in particular just simply can't engage with that. So it limits where we can work in some cases. And so we hope that that policy environments worldwide will continue to crack down on corruption and make it so that we can work in increasingly broad areas. Yeah.
No, thanks for your honesty there. Okay, so we need increased demand and investments. They've been highlighted as the key. I think everybody, all the time when it comes to climate change, investment, investment, investment. How do we get the investment flows going? So I'm curious to hear, maybe Carol, you can comment on this as well. How do you think that demand in the investment side of the green energy should be accelerated? How do we do it? Because, I mean, there is a lot of money flowing to renewable energies right now. Let's be honest, it's one of the success stories of the world in which we live in terms of acting on climate change. But we all need to know that it needs to go faster. So is there an investment angle to this? Is there something, who wants to have a go with this? What would we need to move things faster?
I think it's really interesting because I think we'll make a circle a bit here because there is definitely big interest from the investors within the renewable energy sector. The demand side is as well responding with the demand for renewable energy. But the permitting part and bringing the capacity takes time. And this is what I think very much connected to permitting. And I think we need a lot of spotlight on this area because from one hand, of course, we need to do faster, but we need other kind of process as well to do it because it's ecosystem thinking and how we bring these stakeholders together on much faster pace to find a solution. And maybe the current processes going from one office to another, back to previous office, it just doesn't work very well. And so looking on the investment side, I think there is a big, as I said at the beginning, big interest. I think we need to focus a lot on the permitting and the regulations which are enabling to bring this capacity faster. And maybe the second part which is coming is, of course, the more we have renewable energy in the grid, we need to develop the flexibility of on the demand side as well to secure that we can accommodate this renewable energy. I don't see this obstacle. This is a massive opportunity. And that's the other area which I will bring forward and really curious to hear as well other colleagues here.
Caroline, are you seeing investment in your area? Is that something you feel good about?
Yep, we see great interest from investors in this kind of investments with e-fuel, for example. Another thing I experience when it comes to demand and our customers is that they feel there's some uncertainty when it comes to regulations also on the definition of renewable fuels specifically. And this is something, at least we have experienced in EU now the last 2 years. Which
this is a very interesting point. A very interesting point because I mean, we've had the idea of biofuels around for a while. We've had the idea of different kinds of fuels. I think DHL, the big logistics, post office, whatever, transportation keeps talking about creating liquid fuels from waste. I mean, there's obviously new fuels coming through all the time in different shapes and forms, and hydrogen. Is it green hydrogen? Is it blue hydrogen? How many colors of the rainbow is it, right? I think for many people that don't understand this business, they're a bit confused. And I think there needs to be some kind of clarity on this. Yeah, for sure. But the investment is there, right? The interest is there. And on the shipping side, I mean, we've got some shipping lines like Maersk who want to be trying to be greener, you know, which is really cool. And I think there will be more and more pressure on the shipping companies to deal with this bunker fuel because I don't think the world's going to accept it for too much longer, right? So do you think that the investment flows would become stronger with stronger policy on what do we do with shipping fuels? Let's clear up the whole issue of what are these alternative fuels that you can make through, say, renewable energy. There's a policy angle here.
So if we had regulations also, long-term regulations, that would, of course, create even more interest from investors.
Absolutely, absolutely. Emil, does that chime with you, with Orsted?
Definitely it does. I think there are a bunch of aspects in this, and on the investment side, yes, we see a lot of interest in this. Of course, there is still, so in the very mature regulatory markets where you can say, again, I'll use offshore wind power as an example. We, of course, also look at risk profiles when we consider different markets. And when we go out and make a plus 30-year billion-dollar infrastructure investment in an offshore wind farm, for instance, we need to be quite certain that there is a good pricing mechanism, and that there is a stable regulatory framework that we can count on. And that is, of course, something that is not present across all economies around the world, but that is something that helps to attract investments, because most investors on the big scale, institutional investors, they are fairly risk averse. So they need to have some sort of certainty, and we also need to have that as developers of renewable energy, that if we spend a lot of money investing in a market, that there is a relatively stable framework. So that is one thing. And just quickly on the demand side, for instance, for sustainable fuels, it is some quite, I would say, boring words that are very important, as you also brought up, kind of definitions, standards, and sorry to the legal people out there, but those things that normally are just taken care of by someone else, and that's just how it is in the very mature technologies and products we have lying around. But in these newer technologies, it is so important that there are some agreed upon formalized standards and definitions that's being acknowledged by key institutions and lawmakers, because that enables businesses to be able to show that if they, for instance, source more renewable energy, or if they use sustainable fuels, then that's approved, that's acknowledged, and they can actually show that there's an add-on compared to similar fossil-based technologies.
Katie, I mean, we're talking very Europe here at the moment, developed countries. You're talking about supporting very poor people often in communities in sub-Saharan Africa. But yet, renewables is growing there a lot as well, isn't it? I mean, Kenya's got one of the largest wind farms in sub-Saharan Africa in Turkana. Think the Constant Gardener, John le Carré, if anybody doesn't know where that is. You know, geothermal expanding up the Rift Valley, the Great Rift Valley of that goes from Kenya way up to, in fact, even Yemen. So are you optimistic that you'll see more penetration of renewable energies in sub-Saharan Africa in your lifetime, in our lifetime? Do you think it's taking off in these countries?
Certainly. I mean, I think that, you know, renewable energy in general is becoming, you know, cost competitive and even more cost competitive with traditional fossil fuels. And that it continues to be the case in Africa, especially where you have an abundance of solar power. What we're, you know, really excited about in our industry is this distributed renewable energy potential. And so that, you know, both creates resiliency, and I'm talking about now both solar home systems and mini grids, which are another key technology. So those, you know, are a way to get access to power and renewable power to people faster than you can do with just the traditional grid system. It's also the least cost method of getting, it can be even, you know, a fifth of the cost of extending the grid that's already fairly overtaxed in Africa. And so it's a sector where, or an area where I think we'll see that the distributed renewable energy systems really have a chance to scale things up much more quickly. We're talking about a commercial technology that doesn't really rely on, you know, lengthy permits or need, you know, it needs a supporting environment, but not to the extent that a large scale utility plant does. So it's one where we'd like to see increased investment, because I think that's really one of the key things holding us back from scaling to the extent that we truly could in a fast way.
No, thank you, because I just want to reflect on one quick thing, and I'll come to you in Carol in a second, but with Emil talking about de-risking, and you guys are kind of talking a bit about de-risking too, it's not, here we are in a rich sort of part of the world, but it doesn't seem so different from the chap from India, who was also talking about how do you de-risk the investments in local community investments. So de-risking is a thread, I think, running through a lot of this. I mean, how can it be when wind is so advantageous in terms of economics right now that it still needs to be de-risked, right? There's something going wrong there if the investors aren't jumping in like lions to eat up this wonderful new profit that they can get, you know? Sorry, Carol, go on.
And it's great that you brought this topic that we've been very much focused on, I think Europe and the US, North America a bit on this permitting part. And I think the risking on as a financial instrument is very important from the Global South. And that's why, for example, IKEA Foundation, the philanthropic arm of Inca Group, committed €1 billion to de-risk the investments in renewable within the Global South and replace the fossil fuels. And this is the important part as well, especially for philanthropic arms, to look how to contribute beyond the value chain and the markets where you run your business in a way when you can invest directly, but how can you impact this in the wider scale in a way? And so this is one of the instruments that was adopted within IKEA ecosystem to support this transition to get faster.
Yeah. No, I mean, the developing world needs lots of other assistance too to de-risk. I mean, even that wind farm in Kenya, in northern Kenya, took so long to actually happen. Even it's got the best wind in the whole world, right? It's a constant wind. It's not intermittent. But trying to get the World Bank to de-risk some kind of political issues and trying to, who actually paid for the interconnector from Mombasa to northern Kenya? That wasn't part of the budget of the wind farm operation, but who built the interconnector, right? All this stuff went on. It's a fantastic story. Read about the Lake Turkana wind farm story. Okay, we're getting close to the end of our session, and thank you for bearing with me, and I hope you've enjoyed it. I want to ask you the kind of million-dollar question, really, which is, if you could dream of a wonderful, brilliant outcome at COP27 in Egypt, right, as it relates to your worlds, what might it be? Just briefly, like one thing. What would be great about COP27? Carol, we've got it. Carol, okay, Carol is going to answer this one first.
Yeah, I think it's securing financing for the countries which are hit the most by the climate change and which contributed the least. And I think this is definitely one of the key points for the next COP to solve.
Right. Okay. Finance again always comes up. However you look at this, however you take this onion. Anybody else? Emil?
Yes, I think that it sounds a bit pragmatic, but if we, after COP27, are in a situation where countries have submitted, revisited their NDCs, and we can conclude that 1.5 degree is still alive and is still a possibility, I would be very satisfied.
I think we'd all be very happy if it was still alive after what the IPCC said, and or was it the WMO said the other day? But anyway, let's not go there.
I mean, to be honest, based on the last meeting, COP26, I would be super happy if we have clear targets and timelines set out after COP27.
Right, particularly for e-fuels as well.
Yes, of course.
Of course. Yeah. All right, and lastly, but not least, from Our Lady.
Yes, so I think for me, seeing clear, workable rules on carbon markets. We've seen firsthand how the carbon markets can really fund the necessary climate mitigation and adaptation actions in emerging markets and low-income countries. So for us, it would be great to get those rules finalized, and especially in a way that really funds a lot of these projects in emerging markets.
Good, and I think you're going to see the core carbon principles from the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Markets in July. What a mouthful that was to end the show. Doesn't mean anything to anybody, does it? It's actually quite important, but we have no time. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. We've got to close it down and move on. Very nice to see you, and arrivederci.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye. Okay. Looks like my entire battery has fallen off here we go. That'll be fine. All right. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Johan Rockström, who is joining us for a Q&A on climate policy and energy. Yes. Professor Rockström is a Swedish scientist. I don't know why I have to introduce Professor Johan Rockström in Sweden. It seems absolutely ridiculous, doesn't it? But it is a global show. He's a Swedish scientist, internationally recognized for his work on global sustainability issues. He's a joint director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research in Germany. Johan, we've talked about scaling of the green energy system and energy efficiency today and how we can go even faster. But first, please provide your perspective on the current energy crisis. Are we at a crossroad in how we source and use energy?
Yeah, thanks. Well, it's a really important juncture we're in, and it's a lot of turbulence, and we have all the instabilities, and I think we have to recognize that there are two time steps that are actually right at the center of the energy debate right now, and we tend, particularly politically and media-wise, focus only on the short term, which is this tendency, as a follow-on the Ukraine war, the whole geopolitical instability, that you tend to see politically a step backwards on the real, holding on to the pledges and to the politics around climate policy. And this is worrisome, and journalism tends to jump immediately at this. In this country, my home country, Sweden, the tendency is to focus on how to lower gasoline and diesel prices at the petrol station because of the rising cost of energy, which of course is a complete mistake policy-wise. But then you have the longer term, which is, for example, what's happening in the discussions in Germany, where the whole dependence on fossil fuel, imports from totalitarian sources such as Putin is rather, on the longer term, accelerating the pathway away from fossil fuel dependence. And I think one has to keep both these time steps in mind at the same time, because there's a tendency right now where people getting really worried that, okay, so all focus is on the economy, on energy prices, and therefore we're losing pace on the climate policy. But I think it's actually overall going to be the other way around, that we may have some bumpiness short term, but on the longer term, we will see that the whole climate agenda connects with the security agenda, which therefore accelerates the logic and the investments in the phase out of fossil fuel dependence.
Well, I think what you're touching on, in a sense, is that this war in the Ukraine, which is an absolute shock, I think, particularly to the people there, and for, and probably for the families on both sides of this conflict in many ways that we can't really go into. But what you're saying is there could be in this dark cloud, there could be a silver lining. That actually it wakes us all up.
Well, it's a devastating, disastrous dark cloud, but I think there's no doubt that this will help us position the climate crisis where it deserves to be, which is that it forms part of a security agenda, it forms part of a resilience building agenda, and it's not only the energy transition, by the way, it's equal with the food crisis as well. Food, energy, climate, geopolitics is kind of merging together into becoming one political agenda, which means that to build a resilient Europe or a resilient Germany or a resilient whatever entity you're kind of operating under, if it's a business, a city, or a country, you better move faster towards renewable energy. You better move faster towards becoming more independent when it comes to fertilizers, when it comes to all inputs for food production, when it comes to your own food self-sufficiency. So I think we're moving into a new phase of what globalization really means, not only this kind of efficiency and optimization focus we've seen over the past 50 years, but rather focus on more thought-through collaborative measures, yes, but still building more resilient redundancy so that we can handle shocks in a better way.
Yes, if you're interested in what's happening to my earpiece, you have to actually look at this little machine behind me. Have you got it? Can you see? Can you see? This one? Yes, that fell off. Okay. There we go. Professor Rockström, some of the exciting developments and innovations happening behind the scenes here, exactly. Like the battery pack falling off.
Double noises as well.
Okay, that's great, okay, so we've seen very strong investments in the north of Sweden, focusing on green energy solutions. What are we seeing now? Is it race to the top between the regions? Is that a legitimate question?
You mean in Sweden specifically?
Yeah, it seems to be in Sweden specifically. Is there a Sweden-Pacific question here?
Well, I wouldn't want to isolate it in Sweden. I think what's happening in the northern part of Sweden, which is innovation, investments in fossil fuel-free steel production, major investments in hydrogen technology, major investments in building large-scale battery technology. This is not about Sweden. It's really about pointing the direction for the new jobs, the new economy, the new competitiveness in the future. And what we're seeing is that the industry across sectors is really betting on electrification in a big way. I mean, just a few years back, we were still sitting there wondering, are we moving towards a bio-based energy system, a hydrogen-based energy system, a nuclear-based hydrogen system, or an electric gas-based hydrogen system, which is powered through renewable energy from wind and solar. And now we are seeing clearly that the finance sector and industrial sectors, particularly from the mobility sector, is betting big on electrification. But interestingly also that we're seeing hydrogen as a carrier being a really important investment for the big, difficult-to-abate industries. And this is more like a beacon to the world rather than being a north-south issue in Sweden. I hope, and I don't think this is fantasy today, a few years back it may have been seen in that way, that we're going to see a much stronger strategic binding together of the energy infrastructure across Europe, because we see comparative advantages of producing hydrogen in the southern part of Europe to supply it to the industry in the northern part of Sweden, for example. And that infrastructure is almost like a geopolitical mapping of where do you position your solar, your wind, your hydro, your pipeline systems for different forms of synthetic carriers of fuel. And I think that is the next step. So what's happening in northern part of Sweden may just be the beginning of a new energy landscape in Europe.
Okay. That's very interesting indeed, and interesting for everybody else to watch who are not in the Nordic region. And I can see that developing, yes. What about the incentivization of green energy generally? Can governments do more? You know, the word always comes up is finance, 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 finance. And yet when you listen to some of the commentary in the newspapers and elsewhere, some of these investment funds that say that they're going green with their green flows don't seem to somehow do it as much or as fast as we expected. Is there another way of incentivizing so that the investors really power into it, so that they really reflect the emergency growth we need in renewable energy to deal with the climate crisis? Incentivization.
Well, you know, I don't think it's only that politicians can do more. I think they must do more. And they must do more specifically, particularly in this moment of opportunity, that when we're starting to see, like the IPCC showed, the exponential rise of expansion of renewable energy systems, the exponential fall in prices and the competitiveness, that's the moment where you need to go in with the right economic policies so that you avoid rebound effects when the fossil fuel prices go up. Because what we're seeing, not surprisingly, is that when you get a scarcity on the oil or gas markets, prices go up, and that of course leads to, on the short term, on better competitiveness on renewable energy systems, but also means reopening of fossil fuel-based infrastructure. So you get a spillover effect, an unwanted spillover effects on other markets around the world. So you need to have, kind of a safeguards for that. And what is the safeguards for that? It's very simple. It's the price on carbon. You just put the right price on carbon. And we show increasingly scientifically that should be at least $100 US or euros per ton of carbon dioxide, rising towards 200 very rapidly because the social cost of carbon lies at that level. And if you have that in place, then you buffer against this volatility caused by the rapid rise and fall on coal, oil, and natural gas prices. That's number one. But the number two, which I tend to find very disappointing with a lot of politics, because politicians are increasingly pledging net zero pathways. They are increasingly adopting the carbon law of cutting emissions by half. You see increasingly countries having a price on carbon. I mean, over 50 countries in the world have price on carbon. But what they are missing is to put the end dates on fossil fuel infrastructure. You should simply say, combustion engine is out of the system from 2030, or having ICE, internal combustion engine, free urban zones from 2025. To really signal to the financial institutions, but also to citizens in general, that it's not only the beginning of the end, we're really rushing to the end. We have really clear phase-out dates when we're no longer going to see any form of mobility or industry heated or powered from oil, coal, natural gas. And it's time we do this, because we're still subsidizing coal directly with over 500 billion US dollars per year, indirectly with over $1 trillion, and we're still investing in new oil and coal infrastructure. I mean, that's quite remarkable after the Glasgow 26, where over 100 countries have now pledged net zero pathways, and still we are not able to halt the investments in new infrastructure. So that is why the reason for that is, of course, that we're sending unclear messages into the market. Exactly.
Yeah, mixed messages. And also because governments sometimes are not really very joined up, are they? Because you've got one chap or one lady at the climate conference from the Environment Ministry or Foreign Affairs or somewhere like that, and then somewhere else in the government you've got somebody around the back with a spreadsheet out working out how to build new fossil fuel infrastructure. I mean, joined up government would be really helpful, wouldn't it, so that they all know what they're supposed to be doing.
No, and I think something that we need to, which is difficult but has to happen, and I hope it can happen at COP27, the first COP in the Global South, that 60% of the remaining fossil fuel-based resources are in developing countries. And of course, this is often state-owned, so it's very cheap energy sources because you don't have to pay for it, because it's basically a free common. And of course, scientifically, we can have very strong arguments why it's wrong to not price it, but it's not priced. So that means that the only way, if we really want to rapidly get along the scientific pathways we need to follow, you need to compensate. You need to put big compensation schemes to help rapidly emerging economies and the most vulnerable economies to switch faster. And they have to get that financial help so that they are credit worthy on the market, so that they also can invest in large-scale offshore wind parks in a competitive way. Today, countries like Nigeria has difficulty in doing that because they cannot get the loans at the low interest rates because they don't have the credit worthiness as many other countries have. So there has to be mechanisms of helping, the buffering of the fact that we need to get the Global South to jump on this exponential roadmap as well.
Because these are aware the big emissions are either going to happen or we're going to do something to make sure they don't happen. I mean, these are where the big prizes are in terms of emission reductions.
Correct.
And I think it's sometimes lost that we're doing so much maybe in Sweden or in the developed countries, but actually that's important. But where the big prize is getting this rapidly into the developing countries right now. I think that's absolutely clear.
That's right, and that's why it's an interesting dance, because on the one hand, you have a very firm old argument that the developing countries has caused such a small fraction of the current global warming and don't have the financial capacities of being forerunning. So we have always had this contraction and convergence argument. We've left that after Paris, recognizing that we're in so deep trouble that everyone now needs to come on board the same mitigation pathways. So the story now is that the North, the rich countries, should invest big and show that you get better prosperity, human well-being coming out of that. So it should spill over to the Global South, but that's not enough. You cannot do that alone. You have to also lift the financial investments in the developing countries so that you can accelerate the transition even there. So you have to do both. And so far, we've only done partly the first one.
Yeah. Well, in fact, some of the guests before mentioned this very clearly, which was this issue of de-risking.
Exactly.
And it was interesting. It was coming from a guy in Denmark, actually, with offshore wind in Denmark, but also from an Indian gentleman before about de-risking in the communities there. And I think all around was a sense of de-risking. And I think when you look at the developing countries, I suppose the average audience member here might say, well, who's supposed to do that? Is that the World Bank, or is that some other institution like that?
I think it is the multilateral system. It's IMF. It's the World Bank. It's it has to be a global initiative, and it should be the international community putting forward. The funding has to come from the rich nations, but it should be done through the multilateral system, and it should not be made so bureaucratic that in the end nothing comes through. It has to be really efficient and fast. And really help scaling the big solutions, which can be brought forward, I think, much faster than we're seeing them today.
Last question, Professor Rockström. What are you telling the governments here in Stockholm for Stockholm +50?
Well, my most important message to the current government or any government in Sweden is that please move the agenda of Stockholm +50 away from our fantastic climate and environment ministry to the Prime Minister's office. This is about security, prosperity, and equity into the future. This is about the next phase in modernity for humanity on Earth. And there's so much at stake that we're at risk at undermining our ability to have any kind of modern state development or dignity or peaceful development. So I'd like Stockholm +50, 50 years after heads of state in Indira Gandhi and head of state in Sweden, Olof Palme, put the environment and development agenda on the table. We should not do the mistake of making this the agenda only for the environmental ministries. Yeah. It is really the agenda for the leadership at the highest level in the world. And that is what I see missing to a significant extent here. And we need to raise that factor. And of course, with the geopolitical turbulence we're seeing with the Ukraine war, it's becoming evident for everyone that if you really want to have, peace and security in the future, you don't want to have the heat waves in India shutting down export borders of wheat in India. You don't want to have the starvation in Kenya amplified by droughts caused by our global warming, because that threatens the ability for these nations to be stable, which of course then spills over to migration, displacement, and conflict. That's not what you want. And this is the agenda of the heads of state. It's not the agenda for a single ministry. Yeah. No, I think it's a very valid point. Absolutely.
Okay, I think we're running a little bit out of time. There's only one final thing I want to say just about the Stockholm +50 was that one of our dear friends, Anders Wickman, well, from Sweden, I think he was concerned that the concept of the circular economy wasn't getting enough traction. Is that something that concerns you? Because is that not the next phase we have to go to?
No, definitely it's concerning in the sense that we tend to, debate and focus on just one issue at a time. So we spend all focus on the energy transition, and then we see, which is really positive, much more focus on halting biodiversity loss, but missing too much the fact that we're living in a world that is overloading element cycles of materials through our consumption, which fundamentally is about the linear production systems we're seeing. I mean, we're exploiting for free in one end, and we're polluting for free often in the other end. How do we transition this into circular business models and circular societies, circular behavior among us as citizens in ways that gives us better health and well-being? I think that must be center stage as well in any agenda forward after Stockholm +50.
Thank you so much indeed being with us, and I hope we'll see you tomorrow. And I hope the battery on my battery pack doesn't drop out again and go tumbling to the floor. But it's really great to see you, and look forward to seeing you tomorrow, I think.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for your time. So our next guest here is Asad Razzouk. He's a Lebanese-British clean energy entrepreneur. He's a podcaster and a commentator as well. And he's Chief Executive Officer for Gurin Energy in Asia. And Asad, it looks like, where are you, Asad? You're there on the screen, fantastic. It looks like 2022 will be another bumper year for renewable energy globally, according to the International Energy Agency. But what could make it go faster and further, Asad?
Ooh, where do you want me to start? How much time do we have, Nick?
Can you hear me, Asad? Did you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly, yeah. So it's going to be another bumper year for renewable energy, but what could make it go further and faster, Asad?
Look, it's not a bumper year. Okay, let me just start with bad news. It's not a bumper year because we need to multiply what we're doing by 5 to 7 times in terms of renewable energy only to actually have a chance of limiting warming to 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels. So to be honest, it doesn't matter if it's a bumper year or not. That is not the objective, right? We are failing across the board. And I loved listening to you and the previous speaker. It's been 50 years of talking, right? And throughout these 50 years, emissions have been rising. You know, I think we've exhausted the talking, and bumper year or not, it's not going to actually make a difference to the rise in emissions. Meaning, you know, that's not it. We're not there yet.
What you can't see is that off screen, somebody is fiddling with my microphone and my backpack. So I'm going to ask you the question as if I'm the invisible man, which is probably a blessing for everybody on TV. Asad, I think you were concerned as well when we had a chat before this call that there was something happening in the area of permits for renewable energy. And you may be interested to know that some of our guests before, and they've been talking about blockers to renewable energy, have been raising that very point. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? What is happening here? Is renewable energy being stalled around the world because of the permitting system of governments and systems?
Look, to be honest, I think that's a side topic, and it's a little detail. There's a big elephant in the room. We have been cooking the books for 50 years, these 50 years of talking. So in other words, every financial statement for every single company in the world that you see actually is showing the wrong numbers. And that is the fundamental problem that we have to do something about. So I'll explain. If you take the pollution from 3 companies in 3 different sectors, Exxon, Toyota, and BASF, they disclose exactly how much pollution they're causing, and they are paying exactly 0 for that pollution. If you listen to the professor before and you price that pollution at what he indicated, $50 to $100 per ton of CO2, and this is just the greenhouse gas pollution. It's not the other environmental horrors that they're causing. You would then deduce that Exxon, Toyota, and BASF have been loss-making for, I don't know, 30 years, 40 years, loss-making, which means that none of the money that they invested in that entire period would have been invested. And so long as we keep cooking the books, because our accountants are asleep at the wheel, our insurance companies are asleep at the wheel, our regulators are asleep at the wheel, and our governments are asleep at the wheel, emissions will keep rising, and that 2-degree clock will just keep getting worse. Now, permits in that big scheme, Nick, are an important detail, yes, but they are a tiny little detail to do with one tiny little segment of the problem.
Okay.
If you see what I mean.
Yeah, no, I'm more than happy to come on that. So it's interesting what you're talking about, the cooking of the books, because what you're basically saying is we're not pricing pollution, and we never have been pricing pollution. All these companies have been getting away on this on the cheap or for free. In other words, trashing the environment, yeah? So there is one movement here at Stockholm +50 from something called the Earth for All report, which is a Club of Rome report, 50 years after the 1972 limits to growth. And in that, they specifically ask for a new indicator of wealth beyond GDP, so that actually we do price pollution, and we also better price within the economy when we do the right thing. Is that something that you're passionate about? Do you think that's a way of getting not just renewable energy moving, but actually creating a more sustainable economy everywhere if we have a better, more comprehensive indicator of wealth than this blunt thing called GDP?
Look, that would be what I would call a nice to have. There are many things that are a nice to have. You know, textiles or fast fashion not made from plastic is a nice to have. No more plastic is a nice to have. A green-powered shipping and aviation is a nice to have. So all of these things are a nice to have. But the question is, how do you get there? There's an enormous amount of depression around the world when people look at the climate change problem because they are not offered solutions either that they can affect themselves or that actually work in any way. And what I'm saying when I say we're cooking the books is you've got to change the structure of financial statements. Because until you do so, you will not achieve a result. It's really as simple as that. There was a Twilight Zone Exxon shareholder meeting a week ago. Now, Exxon is one of the biggest companies in the world, and many big investors are represented. So at that shareholder meeting, if you look at the Exxon website, fully 72% of their shareholders voted against reducing emissions. Another 90% voted against Exxon coming up with a low carbon strategy. Another 63% voted against Exxon coming up with a report about its plastic pollution. And I can go on and on and on. So the question you have to ask is, why does all the money in the world want to propagate the fossil fuel system, right? And until you solve that puzzle, everything else is a nice to have. Because unless all the money in the world is talking, frankly, no impact is going to be seen in real life. We're just going to keep talking. And I'm going to be here with you in 20 years. We're going to be talking about Stockholm +70, and we're going to, still get angry and still show no results.
Yeah, probably not, because that would be Nick +84, actually. So I probably wouldn't be around. But, well, maybe just. But I said that you raised an interesting point here, because I know we discussed this before our call about the ExxonMobil shareholder meeting, and it is fantastic, unbelievable that all these investors would still back what they're doing. But maybe not so unbelievable today when you hear that the former or the suspended head of HSBC's sustainable investment area, who said, who cares if Miami's underwater in 100 years? That's not in our business model, basically. We think over the next 5 or 6 years. Now, he's been suspended, everybody's outraged, but you've got this horrible, awful feeling that we're still waiting around for the investment community on a large scale to really say, we are going green, we are interested in green investment flows, and you can actually see them now. You can actually see us doing the green investment. There seems to be a lot of promises, and behind it all, maybe a suspicion from this case at HSBC that they're not quite as honest as they might seem in their climate ambitions. Is that how you read it, or what?
Do you remember Barney, the pretend dinosaur?
But Barney the pretend dinosaur, yeah. We had Cinderella on earlier. We had Cinderella on earlier, so now we can have Barney the pretend dinosaur. The outrage is pretend outrage. Because forget about the outrage. Let's look at what they're actually doing. And what I cited on the Exxon shareholder meeting and what they're doing. So he did this very badly. But actually, he did us a favor because he just came out and said exactly what all these investors and banks are doing. And what they're doing is they're propagating fossil fuels. And the reason they're doing that is because they're looking at financial statements that show all these fake profits, which are Barney, the pretend dinosaur type profits, because the only reason they're profits is because nobody's pricing the environmental destruction around us. I mean, it's a pretty crazy set of facts, but you have to go to the source of the problem. And that is the source of the problem. That is what we have to solve. Right. And what's your podcast called again, Assad? So everybody watching the show can...
Well, you won't be surprised at this point, because it's called The Angry Clean Energy Guy. And you can see why I'm angry.
Assad, thank you. I'm only laughing because that was funny, but what you said was not funny, actually. It's bloody serious. So thank you very much for being on our show, and we'll go over to our next guest. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Boaz Paldi is the United Nations Development Programme's Global Partnership and Engagement Manager, and in his role, Boaz oversees UNDP's campaigns and flagship events. Boaz, are you with us on the magic of Zoom? You are with us. I know you're not in Stockholm, because if you were, you'd be in the studio. So why have you got Stockholm behind you? That's Barney the dinosaur again. Maybe you need to either unmute yourself or...
I have a terrible FOMO, Nick. I've been looking at the show since 6 in the morning, and I just have FOMO. I wish I was there.
Yeah, we wish you were here as well, Boaz. We really do. But Boaz, look, you've been spearheading this amazing global campaign on the topic of fossil fuel subsidies. And I don't know if anybody's seen the dino talks, where a dinosaur enters the UN General Assembly and warns the world leaders not to choose extinction. Well, Boaz is a key player behind that campaign. And for the audience out there, the digital audience, I hope you've seen it too. So I think what we are asking, Boaz, is one of the major blockers to us actually fast-forwarding renewable energy, what is happening with fossil fuel subsidies? Give us your perspective on this.
So fossil fuel subsidies are so negative in so many ways. First of all, they skew our economy. They make renewable energy seem more expensive than fossil fuel energy, than old dirty energy, and that's not the case anymore. We know now for sure that that renewable energy is cheaper. It's fossil fuel subsidies that make them seem like they're more expensive. Keeping the price of fuels relatively low, even though prices are skyrocketing, is really skewing our economy. And we need to move away from fossil fuels. There is no doubt, there is absolutely no doubt that this has to happen, but it also has to happen now. We just don't have time, no pun intended, to wait around. We absolutely need to move forward. And the economy needs to transition to a sustainable green economy that does not rely on these very, very dangerous burning of fossil fuels. The other thing that it does is just take up an enormous amount of resources. Last year alone, $423 billion were used by governments for fossil fuel subsidies. 80% of that goes to manufacturers. That means fossil fuel companies, essentially. And the rest goes in various other ways to cover that cost. Imagine what you could do positively with $423 billion. Imagine how many green jobs you could create. Imagine how many girls you could educate. Imagine if we still have a massive problem with COVID-19. Imagine how we could vaccinate every single person on Earth 4 times over with that money. So there's so much positive impact that we can have, and at the moment it's a negative impact. We have $423 billion last year of negative impact. But there's more bad news. This year, fossil fuel subsidies are going to be at about $600 billion. So we've added onto them rather than reducing them. So of course there's no magic bullet here. But the first thing that we need to do is somehow reform these outdated and very dangerous fossil fuel subsidies.
I mean, Boaz, we both talked about this. I mean, it's a difficult time, right, with the price of fossil fuels being what they are. There are many poorer parts of the world where people don't have access to renewable energy, so they're still stuck using fossil fuel-based fuels for cooking and things like that. And as the price of fuels goes up, their lives become ever more challenged. So the answer to that is what? Some kind of targeting of the most vulnerable in the developing world, and perhaps in some places in the developed world, but not just a blanket subsidy.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, why go through a middleman? If you have $423 billion or $600 billion, you could instate temporary basic income. You can instate universal basic income. You could give cash payments to people that would cover the rise in price of fuel, help them out, make sure that they're not left behind, but not use it directly to subsidize fossil fuels. That gives us an opportunity to move away from that trajectory. fossil fuels are only going to increase now. There's no way that they're ever coming down again. You know, in 2020, suddenly we saw all fossil fuels coming down dramatically, and we were all kind of excited about that because we only paid in the United States. I remember paying, you know, about $1.90 for a gallon of fuel, and now, you know, I'm paying about $5 for a gallon of fuel, and that was, you know, and that's the true price of fuel. But as a previous speaker said, none of that takes into the account the environmental destruction that is going on through that. And so the true price of fossil fuels is so much higher. And so, yes, for the most vulnerable in the communities that are not yet in a situation where they can transition to greener energies, we should help them out. We should definitely not leave anyone behind. And it's not an equal playing field. But for those that can, the transition to a greener energy is an absolute necessity as quickly as we possibly can.
Bose, I think that's really great, and thank you for spending some time with us, coming in from well, certainly not Stockholm, Sweden, but coming in from New York, and we really do appreciate that. I just wanted to let the audience know, the audience out there, that the We Don't Have Time support with UNDP and Bose and his team on what we call the Dino Talks is still ongoing, and we hope to have one episode of the Dino Talks on fossil fuel subsidies on Sunday, on the 5th of June, which is World Environment Day, and then there'll be another one next month and next month, right up to the climate conference in Egypt in November. And it's thanks to Bose and his team that they wanted to partner with us, and we're very happy to be partnering with them. So Bose, thanks very much indeed. Arrivederci, goodbye, and talk to you soon.
Next time in Sweden.
Thank you. Great, so that pretty much wraps up where we are, but I wonder if there's a little time just to bring on our two partners in crime here, which is Ingmar Renshag, CEO and founder of We Don't Have Time, and Johan Falk, who is CEO and co-founder of the Exponential Roadmap. Over to you guys.
Yes, it's been a great show, and we're really moving towards the green energy. And that's great, but what we also have seen is that we're also still using so much of the old energy. And we can't just grow the new solutions, we must also degrow the fossil fuel energy. So that's why I have this warning. We need to give all those companies and also countries a climate warning if they still are expanding their fossil fuel extraction. I'm from finance industry before I founded We Don't Have Time, and I got really shocked last week when I read that on ESG, that is environmental social governance, green investments, we have ExxonMobil on one of the top placement on that list, and Tesla is not even invited by 500 most sustainable companies on the stock market. This is where your money goes if you invest green, so don't choose ESG. Instead, open the We Don't Have Time app and find the companies that are doing the action like you see here and invest in them and give them some climate love also. So we need to degrow everything.
Good point. Yeah, I
can't
believe that.
And grow everything that is good.
I can't believe ExxonMobil is a top pick as an ESG company.
I think it's like top 10.
Really fantastic. Yeah. That's fantastic. This is a parallel universe, isn't it, where we're all living upside down. So that's quite amazing. Johan, your take on what we've just been hearing.
You know, what we heard is that solutions basically exist to even halve emissions by 2030. You know, energy efficiency, the green energy system. So the question is really, why aren't we moving there? And I think the key point is we have still too few people working with the right compass direction. Too many people are working in the wrong direction. And still the global economy is directing us in the wrong direction. So our mission, what is that? We need to get every single company should be part of Race to Zero, or they should be out of business. So I think our mission is to get all innovation, all companies on the same track, because then we can get there. We need to just raise the energy up to COP27, double it for each COP, just put more pressure on. When we have sufficient number of people, because it's people we're talking about, actually setting a new compass direction, then we will succeed. And I think we're reasonably close to that tipping point. So that is why it's so important that we believe it is possible, it is achievable. We just have to convince 10 other people, 100 other people, 1,000 other people to join and shift compass direction.
Yeah.
So that's my take on it.
I think it's a very good point. It's like when you're pushing the big rock up to the top of the mountain, you have no idea that if it just goes a little bit further to the top, it rolls very fast down the other side. Seems almost impossible. But I'm sure you're right. I mean, we've never lived a time where there are so many companies at least starting to move in the right direction, as you rightly point out. And it can go faster, which is why we don't have time.
Yes, and I can say something, just last statement regarding time. The most important climate action everyone can do is to spend your time working on solution. And I'm very pleased and very hopeful to see that more and more people are now leaving and don't want to work for the fossil fuel giants anymore. We're going to see some of them speak here later this week, and I think that will really catalyze change. I know that not everyone can choose who they're going to work for, but if you can, you should, because that will catalyze change the fastest. Because if a talent leave a bad company and joins a good company, we will see the degrowth of everything we need to get rid of, and we will see the growth of everything we need. And it's much funnier to work with something that are saving our future instead of destroying it, believe me.
On that note, thank you very much, everybody. Every day, Spotify goes live with a podcast here from their Climate Action Studios. And according to what I'm being scripted here to say, I hand it over to them. Thank you.
We grow up, and we play. We invent new ways of doing things, and we collaborate. We prepare for that special date, and we care for each other. We do whatever it takes, but our world is on fire, and our future is at stake. We don't have time to wait, but no country, business, or individual can fix this on their own. Together, we can set things straight. Let's act. Through the power of many, we can make change happen. Let's encourage sustainable solutions. Let's suggest new ways of doing things and demand bad practices to stop. We all unite behind the one thing that matters, to save our world. Will you join us?
We are in a climate emergency, and we are very far from where we need to be.
Welcome to the second Exponential Climate Action Summit.
This decade is crucial for the future of us all.
The outcome for humanity could actually spell disaster.
There are no jobs on a dead planet.
And that's why waiting is not an option.
We're not recovering in a green way as we had hoped last Earth Day.
Poor communities are the one really facing the biggest burden of climate effects.
World Bank estimates that every year we need $4 trillion of capital in emerging and developing economies to pay for the mitigation and adaptation needs.
Personally, I don't believe the fossil fuel industry should continue to be allowed to operate the way it's been operating for the last several decades.
The vast majority of green products on the market today create new profits for investment firms that do absolutely nothing to fight climate change.
We have to transform the 55% greenhouse gas reduction target that we now have at the European level, the declaration that we're getting from other countries, including Biden today, to halve their emissions, into actions.
So we need strong climate action from business, we need strong climate action from finance. I will encourage every company, every financial institution to join the Race to Zero immediately.
Investing in a low-carbon, a resilient economy is actually an enormous opportunity right now.
The winners will be the ones creating positive impact.
And what we do at Prime is we offer investment options in solar energy projects in emerging markets.
So FinTech is helping resolve access issues for the financially excluded while addressing climate change issues at the same time.
The key here is to put at least the same amount of determination behind actions to achieving this target as we do for major financial or business targets that the companies typically steered on.
So we don't have time, but we do have solutions.
When you scale this solution, in fact, we will save money. We will increase our productivity.
It's a $100 trillion plus economy, the greatest opportunities ever.
That is how we change things together. Your opinions will also be a rating on our platform, where those business and organizations that are doing good climate action will get a better climate score compared to the ones not doing enough. This is going to change how corporations compete.
This top line is 200 to 300 green growth companies that are delivering much better results while taking down our footprints.
Young people have demonstrated that campaigns on the ground can actively shape where the money goes.
We want to be the provider that shows to the company, its employees, that you can make a change with your savings.
We've now got 87 asset managers with $37 trillion of assets. That's more than a third of global assets committed to net zero by 2050, and 43 banks with $29 trillion.
The drive to net zero is the growth story of the 21st century.
And the time to act is now.
And about 73% globally of all used clothing is being incinerated or landfilled today.
Our food systems are failing massively, both people and planet.
In 40, 50 years, the glass age will sort of be over because we don't have any sand left to produce glass.
So ultimately, over 90% of all that hard-won stuff we use slips through our fingers and ends up as waste.
Welcome to the third Exponential Climate Action Summit broadcast.
All together, we have an amazing opportunity to create a sustainable future by transitioning to a society based on circular principles.
We use 95% less water than traditional farming.
Reusing products has given us a revenue growth of, on average, 20% per year.
So we decided to design for circularity and eliminate the concept of waste.
We want to create a climate neutral car by 2030.
It's removing 1.54 kilos of carbon per bottle.
You have to understand the life cycle impact to know if it's better to use and reuse or if it's better to recycle and use the material another time.
The problem, though, is that the nitrogen that we produce are we not allowed to use today. Because today's legislation, if you're going to use something, it depends on origin and not the quality. And if it has been waste, it is banned.
What governments should do is to ban like landfill possibilities.
Today, reused materials very often are more expensive than virgin materials.
Cars have now absorbed almost all the space in cities, all the rights of way, all the parking space.
We can't wait for 2025, 2030. We need to change now.
Digitalization is one of the great opportunities to actually transform the world as we know it right now.
We need to have a behavioral change and mindset, not only in the companies, but also in the consumers and in the governments.
What if we could change the system together? We believe by rewarding climate solutions and warning all the polluters, we will make it profitable to save our planet and super expensive to destroy it.
The circular economy is gaining traction around the world.
We are working on a system of laws and improvements to the system so that you can fix everything.
More than 2/3 of the world economy are covered now by net zero targets.
The initiative is really about bringing together the leading companies that will transform, disrupt, and innovate our way along that pathway.
We are ready to make this transformation the greatest collab in human history.
The future is in our hands.
So what will this require then for us to achieve in Glasgow? But this must be the moment when we say goodbye to yesterday's provision of energy.
We are going to be there by train, of course, and we're going to do daily broadcasts in 2 weeks.
We are, of course, really happy to team up with We Don't Have Time during COP26.
We're there really to drive up numbers.
COP26, of course, is critical.
I think the most important thing will be for all member states to understand that the material use should be a priority in their climate policies.
And we will be there and shine a light on what's happening.
For many years, we thought that the oil, coal, and gas